Close your eyes for just a moment, if you wish. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it out gently, like a whisper into the night. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story that has puzzled the world for over a century, a story of 3 children, a mysterious visitor, and secrets that shook the very foundations of faith. But don't worry, this isn't a story meant to trouble you. It's a story meant to make you wonder, to make you dream, and perhaps, as the night grows deeper, to help you drift peacefully into sleep. We're going to travel together, you and I. We're going to journey back in time, to a place where the land was simple and the sky was wide. To a country called Portugal, in a year when the world was tearing itself apart with war. But in one small corner of that country, in a place so quiet you could hear the grass growing, something extraordinary was about to happen. So settle in. Pull your blanket a little closer. Let your shoulders relax. Let the weight of the day fall away from you like autumn leaves from a tree. We have time. We have all the time in the world. And our story. Our story begins with the sound of sheep bells tinkling in the distance under a sky so blue it seemed to go on forever. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Picture, if you will, a land of rolling hills and ancient olive groves. Portugal in the year 1917, a small country on the edge of Europe, perched beside the great Atlantic Ocean, where the waves have been rolling since the beginning of time. The sun rises here with a particular kind of gentleness. Not harsh, not aggressive, but soft, like honey dripping from a spoon. It touches the whitewashed walls of small villages first, then spreads across the fields, turning everything golden. The farmers rise early, as they always have, as their fathers did, and their fathers before them. The land here has been worked by human hands for thousands of years, and it remembers. The soil remembers. In 1917, the world beyond Portugal's borders was consumed by war. The Great War, they called it, though there was nothing great about it except its horror. Millions of young men dying in muddy trenches across Europe, the sound of artillery fire rolling like thunder across France and Belgium, poison gas drifting through the air like evil fog, empires crumbling, old certainties dissolving like salt in water. But here, in the Portuguese countryside, in a region called Extremadura, in a small parish known as Fatima, life continued much as it always had. Oh, the war touched them. Young men from the villages went off to fight, and not all of them came home. Food was sometimes scarce. There were worries, certainly. Prayers whispered in candlelit churches. But the rhythm of life, the ancient rhythm of planting and harvest, of birth and death, of morning prayers and evening bells, continued. The land itself seemed to breathe peace, fields of wheat swaying in the breeze like waves on a golden ocean, cork trees with their gnarled, wise trunks, olive trees silver green in the sunlight, stone walls built centuries ago, still standing, still marking boundaries between one family's land and another's, and everywhere the sound of bells, church bells from the village towers, sheep bells from the flocks that dotted the hillsides. The village of Fatima itself was small, a handful of streets, a church with a simple bell tower, houses with red tile roofs, families who had known each other for generations. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Grandmother would tell granddaughter the same stories her grandmother had told her. The baker's hands would shape bread the same way his father's hands had shaped it. Time moved differently here, slower, steadier, like the turning of the seasons. The air smelled of earth and herbs, rosemary growing wild on the hillsides, lavender in small gardens, the sharp, clean smell of sheep wool, the sweet smell of hay drying in the sun, and always, underneath everything, the smell of stone, of ancient rock, of the bones of the earth itself. And at night, the sky would fill with more stars than you could count in a lifetime. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. In the darkness, you could hear dogs barking in distant farms, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush. And if you listened very carefully, very quietly, you could almost hear the land itself breathing. In, out, patient, eternal. This was the world into which 3 children were born. This was the world they knew, the only world they had ever known, a world of simple faith, hard work, and ancient rhythms, a world where miracles seemed far away, something from the Bible, from long ago, a world where God was in his heaven and the saints were in their churches and life was simply life, day following day following day. But sometimes, just sometimes, heaven reaches down and touches the earth, and when it does, everything changes. Let me tell you about Lucia. Lucia dos Santos was 10 years old in the spring of 1917. 10 years old, but already she had the bearing of someone older, someone with responsibilities. She was the eldest daughter in her family, and in that time, in that place, being the eldest daughter meant something. It meant you helped your mother. It meant you looked after the younger children. It meant you carried water and kneaded bread and swept floors and did all the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. Lucia had a round, serious face, dark eyes that seemed to look right through you, as if she could see something beyond the surface of things, dark hair that curled despite her best efforts to keep it neat, strong hands from working, a straight back from carrying heavy loads. She was practical, reliable, the kind of child adults trusted with important tasks. But there was something else about Lucia, a depth, a quietness. She loved to pray, not out of duty but out of genuine devotion. She loved the stories of the saints, the martyrs, the mystics. She loved the rosary, the feeling of the beads between her fingers, the rhythm of the prayers. Sometimes her mother would find her kneeling by her bed long after she should have been asleep, lips moving silently, lost in conversation with someone no one else could see. She was a good shepherd, patient with the sheep, watchful. She knew which ones were likely to wander off. She knew where the good grazing was. She could tell from the clouds whether rain was coming. She could read the land the way you might read a familiar book. Then there was Francisco. Francisco Marto was 9 years old, Lucia's cousin. He was a gentle boy, quiet, dreamy, while other boys his age were roughhousing and shouting. Francisco would sit and watch the clouds drift by, or listen to the wind in the trees, or follow the path of a single ant across a stone. He had a face like an angel in an old painting, delicate features, large eyes, a softness about him that made old women want to pinch his cheeks and ruffle his hair. Francisco loved nature with a passion that was almost spiritual. He loved the sheep, but not just as livestock. He loved them as creatures of God, each one individual, each one precious. He would talk to them softly, tell them secrets. He loved birds. He could identify them by their songs. He would stop whatever he was doing to listen to a lark singing high above the fields. "Listen," he would whisper to his sister. "Listen to how happy he is." He was a boy of few words, but when he spoke, people listened, because his words were always thoughtful, always kind. He never complained, never whined. Even when he was tired or hungry or uncomfortable, he would simply press his lips together and carry on. His mother said he had been born with an old soul. He played a small shepherd's flute, carved from a piece of reed, simple, primitive, but in his hands it made music that seemed to come from another world, haunting melodies that drifted across the hills in the evening, making farmers pause in their work to listen. Songs without words, but full of meaning, songs that seemed to speak of things beyond this world. And then there was Jacinta. Jacinta Marto, Francisco's younger sister, was only 7 years old. 7 years old and small for her age, dark-haired like the others, with a heart-shaped face and enormous eyes. She was the baby of the group, and she knew it, and sometimes she used it to her advantage, a little spoiled, perhaps, and used to getting her way, quick to tears if she didn't. But Jacinta had something special about her too, a sensitivity, an awareness. She felt things deeply. She could tell when someone was sad even if they were smiling. She could sense when a storm was coming not from the clouds but from the feeling in the air. She had nightmares sometimes, terrible nightmares about wars and suffering, and she would wake up crying and need to be comforted back to sleep. She adored her older brother, followed him everywhere, copied everything he did. When he played his flute, she would dance, spinning in circles until she fell down dizzy and laughing. When he prayed, She would kneel beside him, her small hands clasped tightly together, her eyes squeezed shut with the effort of concentration. She loved flowers, would gather them in bouquets and bring them to the village church to lay before the statue of Mary. Wild daisies and poppies and tiny blue flowers whose names she didn't know but loved anyway. She loved pretty things, shiny things, ribbons and beads and the way sunlight sparkled on water. She was innocent in a way that even the other children weren't quite anymore. Pure, uncomplicated. When she loved completely. When she believed something, she believed it with her whole heart. There was no cynicism in her, no doubt, no guardedness. She was open to the world like a flower is open to the sun. These three children, Lucia, Francisco, Jacinta, cousins, friends, playmates, together almost every day, watching the sheep, playing games, telling stories, living their simple lives under that wide Portuguese sky. They didn't know they were about to become part of history. They didn't know that their names would be spoken in churches all over the world. They didn't know that people would study their every word, analyze their every action, debate their every claim. They were just children, just three ordinary children in an ordinary place at an ordinary time. Except that nothing about what was about to happen to them would be ordinary at all. It was May, the month of Mary, as the church calls it. May of 1917, and the spring had been particularly beautiful that year. The rains had been generous, and everything was green and growing. The wildflowers were spectacular, entire hillsides painted with color. The lambs were healthy and strong, gamboling through the fields on legs that still seemed too long for their bodies. On the 13th day of May, the three children took their sheep out to graze as they did every day. They had been given permission to take the flock to a place called Cova da Iria, the Cove of Irene. It was a beautiful spot, a natural depression in the land, sheltered from the wind, with good grass for the sheep and a few trees for shade. A peaceful place. Quiet, the kind of place where you could hear yourself think. The morning was clear and bright, not too hot yet. The real heat of summer hadn't arrived. The sky was that perfect blue that seems to go on forever, with just a few small white clouds drifting lazily across it like boats on a calm sea. The kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. The kind of day where everything feels right with the world. The children played while the sheep grazed. They built a small stone shelter, piling rocks to make walls, pretending it was a house. They said the rosary, as they had been taught, the prayers falling from their lips in a familiar rhythm. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The words were comfortable, like an old blanket, like coming home. The rosary. They played some more. Francisco played his flute. Jacinta danced. Lucia watched the sheep, counted them, made sure none were wandering too far. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The morning wore on, perfect and peaceful and utterly normal. And then something happened. It started with the light. Not the ordinary light of the sun, which they had been living in all morning. This was different. This was something else entirely. A flash, sudden and bright, like lightning, but not like lightning at all. It came from the east, from the direction of the rising sun. But it was not the sun. It was brighter than the sun. Whiter, purer, a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The children stopped what they were doing, froze, looked at each other with wide eyes. Had they all seen it? Yes, they had all seen it. Lucia's first thought was thunder. If there was lightnings, there must be thunder coming. A storm. They should gather the sheep, head for home. She looked at the sky, but the sky was still clear. Still that perfect, endless blue. No storm clouds, no darkness, nothing that would explain the light. Maybe we should go home, she said to the others. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Small, uncertain. But before they could move, before they could take a single step toward gathering the sheep, the light came again. This time it was closer, stronger. It seemed to fill the entire world. The children shielded their eyes, but even through their hands they could see the brightness. It didn't hurt. That was the strange thing. A light that bright should hurt your eyes, should make you look away, should leave spots dancing in your vision. But this light didn't hurt at all. It was gentle, warm, welcoming. And in the light, a figure began to form. It happened slowly, or maybe it happened all at once and just seemed slow because their minds couldn't process what they were seeing. The light gathered itself, concentrated itself, took shape, and the shape was a woman. A woman standing in the air above a small holm oak tree. She was young. She looked perhaps 16 or 17 years old. She was dressed all in white, a white robe that seemed to be made of the light itself, that shimmered and glowed with its own radiance. Her hands were joined in prayer, held at her chest. On her right hand, a rosary hung, the beads gleaming like tiny stars. Her face was beautiful beyond words. Not the beauty of earthly women, not the beauty you see in paintings or in the faces of brides. This was something else. A beauty that came from within, a beauty that was light itself, joy itself, love itself. Her eyes were dark and deep as the night sky, but filled with such kindness, such tenderness, such overwhelming love that to look into them was to feel completely safe, completely known, completely cherished. She smiled at the children, and her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. The children couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. They were frozen in place, not from fear, though there was fear, certainly. The kind of fear you feel when confronted with something so far beyond your understanding that your mind can barely grasp it, but from awe, pure, overwhelming awe. Jacinta grabbed Lucia's hand. Her small fingers gripped tight. Francisco fell to his knees, his mouth open, his eyes wide. Lucia felt her heart hammering in her chest like a trapped bird trying to escape. And then the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, but psychical, like wind chimes tinkling in a gentle breeze, like water flowing over smooth stones. Like all the beautiful sounds in the world woven together into words. "Do not be afraid," she said. "I will do you no harm." And with those words, the fear began to drain away. Not completely, how could it, in the presence of something so tremendous, but enough to breathe, enough to think, enough to listen. Lucia found her voice. It came out as barely a whisper. "Where are you from?" The woman smiled again. "I am from heaven." Heaven, the word hung in the air between them. Heaven, that place they sang about in church, that place the priest talked about, that place where the saints lived, where the angels dwelt, where God himself sat on his throne. Heaven, which had always seemed so far away, so unreachable, so much like a beautiful story that might not be entirely true. But here was someone from heaven, standing right in front of them, real, more real than anything they had ever seen. "What do you want of me?" Lucia asked. It was the question that rose naturally to her lips. If someone from heaven comes to you, surely they want something. Surely there's a reason. The woman's expression became serious, still loving, still kind, but serious. "I have come to ask you to come here for 6 months in succession, on the 13th day, at this same hour. Later I will tell you who I am and what I want. Afterwards, I will return here a 7th time." 6 months, 6 visits. The 13th of each month, the children's minds spun, trying to take it in. This was real. This was happening. This was not a dream, not their imagination, not something they could explain away. "Will I go to heaven?" Lucia heard herself ask. It was a child's question, direct, honest, the most important question in the world. "Yes, you will." Relief flooded through Lucia like warm water. Yes, Bess, yes, she would go to heaven. And Jacinta? Also. And Francisco? The woman looked at Francisco, still kneeling, still staring with those wide, awestruck eyes. Also, but he must say many rosaries. Francisco nodded eagerly, not even caring that apparently he needed to pray more than the girls. He would say 100 rosaries, 1,000, as many as it took. The woman spoke more then. She asked them if they were willing to offer themselves to God, to bear all the sufferings he might send them, to make reparation for sins and for the conversion of sinners. The children said yes. They didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to, but they said yes anyway. How could they say anything else? And then she told them something that made them fall silent. She told them they would suffer much, but the grace of God would be their comfort. The children nodded. They would suffer much. They accepted this. They didn't know what it meant yet, but they accepted it. The woman began to rise then, slowly, gracefully, moving upward toward the east. The light around her grew brighter, so bright that the children had to shield their eyes again. And then she was gone. The light faded. The sky was just sky again. The sun was just the sun. The day was just a day. The children stood in the Cova da Iria, next to their sheep, and looked at each other with changed eyes. They had seen something from another world. They had been touched by the divine, and nothing would ever be the same again. What do you do when you've seen a vision? When you've spoken with someone from heaven? When the ordinary world has suddenly revealed itself to be far less ordinary than you thought? The children walked home that day in a daze. The sheep followed along, unconcerned, unaware that anything unusual had happened. The sun continued its path across the sky. Birds sang. The wind rustled through the grass. Everything was exactly as it had been that morning. But everything was different. Jacinta couldn't keep the secret. She was 7 years old, and a secret this big was too much for her small heart to hold. As soon as they got home, before Lucia could stop her, she ran to her mother. "Mama, Mama, we saw a beautiful lady from heaven." Her mother, Olympia, was stirring a pot over the fire. She looked down at her daughter with an expression somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "What are you talking about, child?" A lady dressed all in white. She was floating in the air. She talked to us." Pia exchanged a glance with her husband, T. Marto, who was sitting at the table. "You've been playing too many make-believe games," she said gently. "Now go wash your hands for supper." But Jacinta insisted, and Francisco, quiet Francisco, who almost never spoke up, confirmed it. Yes, they had seen a lady. Yes, she was from heaven. Yes, she had talked to them. The parents didn't know what to make of it. Children have vivid imaginations. Children see things that aren't there. It's normal. It's part of being a child. But their children didn't usually tell lies, and they seemed so sincere, so convinced. Word spread quickly through the village, as word does in small places. Lucia's mother, Maria Rosa, was mortified. She was a stern woman, devout but practical, and the idea that her daughter was going around claiming to have seen visions from heaven was horrifying. It was blasphemous. It was attention-seeking. It was wrong. She questioned Lucia harshly. "What is this nonsense you're telling people?" "It's not nonsense. Mama, we really saw her." "You're lying. You're making it up for attention." "I'm not lying." Tears sprang to Lucia's eyes. She had never lied to her mother. Never to her. But Maria Rosa didn't believe her. Worse, she was angry. She punished Lucia, made her do extra chores, told her she was bringing shame to the family, told her to stop telling these stories immediately. But Lucia couldn't stop, because it was true. It had happened. How could she deny what she had seen with her own eyes? The village was divided. Some people believed the children, others thought it was nonsense. Still others thought it was something darker, perhaps the devil, trying to deceive innocent children. The priest was cautious. He didn't dismiss the children outright, but he didn't embrace their story either. He advised caution, discernment, prayer. The children themselves were confused by the reaction. They had seen something beautiful, something holy, something that had filled them with joy. Why were the adults angry? Why didn't they understand? But despite the opposition, despite the mockery and the punishment and the doubt, the children knew what they knew. They had been asked to return on the 13th of June, and they would return, no matter what anyone said. The days crawled by. May turned toward June. The children counted down to the 13th. They prayed their rosaries. They talked among themselves about what had happened, going over every detail, making sure they all remembered it the same way, and they waited. On June 13th, despite her mother's threats, despite the village's skepticism, Lucia returned to the Cova de Iria. Francisco and Jacinta went with her. And this time, they weren't alone. Curiosity had done its work. About 50 people from the village came along, wanting to see what would happen. They didn't all believe, but they were curious. And in a small village where not much happens, even the possibility of something unusual is worth investigating. And at noon, the hour when the vision had appeared before, the children knelt by the holm oak tree and began to pray. The crowd stood back, watching, whispering among themselves. Some were respectful, others were mocking. Some were genuinely hopeful that something miraculous might happen. And then the light came again. The children saw it. The crowd did not, but the crowd saw the children's reaction, saw their faces change, saw them fall to their knees, saw Lucia's lips begin to move in conversation with someone the others couldn't see. The children were seeing the lady again. Beautiful, radiant, kind. She spoke with Lucia. She gave them messages. She told them to pray the rosary every day. She told them to learn to read so they could understand the scriptures better. She showed them something, a vision of something that made Lucia's face go pale, made Jacinta start to cry. But she also filled them with peace, with love, with a sense of purpose. When it was over, when the lady had departed again, the children turned to the crowd with shining eyes. It had happened again. She had come back, just as she promised. Some in the crowd believed, how could they not? Seeing the children's faces, seeing their obvious sincerity, others remained skeptical. It was easy enough to pretend. They said the children were putting on a show. But the children didn't care about the skeptics. They had seen what they had seen, and the lady had told them she would return again in July, and in August, and in September and October, 6 times total, she had said, and they would be there every time. Word spread beyond the village now, beyond the parish, into the nearby towns, into Lisbon itself. Journalists came, curious seekers, scoffers, believers, more and more people, each month, gathering at the Cova de Iria on the 13th day, hoping to witness. What? A miracle? A fraud? They weren't sure, but they came anyway. And the children, these 3 ordinary children from an ordinary village, found themselves at the center of something much bigger than themselves, something they didn't fully understand, something that was growing larger every day. The world was starting to pay attention. And soon, very soon, the world would witness something it had never seen before. Summer came to Portugal with its usual warmth. The days grew longer, hotter. The fields turned from green to gold. The sheep sought shade under the scattered trees. Panting in the heat, life continued its ancient rhythm. But now that rhythm had a new beat woven into it, the 13th of each month, when the world seemed to hold its breath. July 13th arrived with a cloudless sky. By now, thousands of people had heard about the children and their visions. The crowd that gathered at Cova de Iria that day numbered several thousand. They came from all over Portugal, farmers and shopkeepers, housewives and students, believers and skeptics, the devout and the curious. They came in wagons and on foot, on horseback and in carriages. They brought sick relatives, hoping for healing. They brought rosaries and holy medals. They brought questions and doubts and hopes. The children arrived at noon, as always. Lucia, serious and steady. Francisco, quiet and withdrawn. Jacinta, small and pale, overwhelmed by the crowds. They knelt by the holm oak tree, now barely visible under the weight of all the offerings people had hung on its branches, ribbons and medals and flowers and notes. The sun beat down mercilessly. The crowd pressed close, everyone wanting to see, to hear, to understand. Some people were reverent, kneeling in prayer. Others were rowdy, treating it like a carnival. Still others were hostile, muttering that it was all a hoax, that the children should be punished for leading people astray. At noon exactly, the children's faces changed. The light had come again. The lady had returned. The crowd couldn't see her, but they saw other things, strange things. The sun seemed to dim, as if a cloud had passed over it, though there were no clouds. The air grew cooler. Some people heard a buzzing sound, like thousands of bees, though no bees were visible. Others reported a sweet smell, like roses or incense, that seemed to come from nowhere. Tan and the children. The children were clearly seeing something. Lucia spoke, asking questions, receiving answers that only she could hear. Francisco stared with wide eyes, not hearing the lady's voice. She had told him he wouldn't, but he would see her, drinking in her presence. Jacinta wept quietly, overcome with emotion. This time, the lady told them more. She told them to continue coming. She told them to pray for sinners. She told them that in October, she would tell them who she was and would perform a miracle so that everyone would believe. A miracle. In October, the crowd seized on this promise. A miracle. Something visible, something undeniable, something that would prove once and for all whether these children were seeing something real or just imagining things. But the lady told them something else that day. Something she said was for them alone, not to be shared with others. The first part of the secret. And what she showed them made Lucia gasp, made Francisco go even paler than usual, made Jacinta sob with terror. When the vision ended, the children were shaken. Lucia tried to comfort Jacinta, but how could she, when she herself was trembling? What they had seen, what they had been shown. The crowd pressed in, demanding to know what the lady had said. Lucia shared what she could, the call to prayer, the promise of a miracle in October. But when they asked about the secret, she shook her head. "We can't tell you, Cha," she said, "it's for us alone." This only made people more curious, more insistent, but the children wouldn't budge. A secret was a secret, and they had promised. August came, but August would be different. The local administrator, a man named Arturo de Oliveira Santos, was a secularist who despised the Catholic Church and everything it stood for. He saw the gatherings at Fatima as a threat, a superstitious rabble being misled by clever children or perhaps by priests seeking to increase their influence. He decided to put a stop to it. On August 13th, when the children should have been at Cova de Iria, they were instead locked in a jail cell. The administrator had tricked their parents, claiming he wanted to take the children to Cova de Iria himself to investigate the matter. Instead, he took them to the jail, interrogated them harshly, threatened them with torture and death if they didn't admit they were lying. The children were terrified, but they didn't recant. They couldn't. What they had seen was real. No threat, no matter how frightening, could make them say otherwise. Meanwhile, at Cova de Iria, thousands of people had gathered, waiting for the apparition. Noon came and went. No children appeared. The crowd grew restless, confused. Where were they? And then, remarkably, something happened anyway. A clap of thunder, though the sky was clear. A flash of light. A small cloud descended over the holm oak tree. Those standing nearby reported feeling a sudden coolness, seeing a shower of something like rose petals falling from the sky, though when they tried to catch them, there was nothing there. The lady had come, even without the children present. The administrator, meanwhile, was getting nowhere with his interrogation. He tried kindness, then threats, then attempted to turn the children against each other. He took each one separately and told them the others had confessed to lying, but the children saw through the deception. They knew their friends would never lie, and they wouldn't either. Finally, frustrated and perhaps a little unnerved by the children's unshakable certainty, he released them. The children returned home, shaken but resolute. The lady appeared to them a few days later, on August 19th, while they were tending sheep at a place called Valinhos. She reassured them. She told them the same messages. She told them not to be afraid. And she told them again, in October. Everyone would see. Everyone would believe. September 13th came. The crowd was even larger now, perhaps 30,000 people. The story had spread across Portugal and into Spain and France. Newspapers were covering it, some sympathetically, some mockingly. The Catholic Church was watching carefully. neither condemning nor endorsing, waiting to see what would happen. The children arrived, escorted by protective villagers who had to push through the massive crowd. They knelt, they prayed, and at noon, the lady came again. This time, she told them more of the secret. The second part, information about future wars, about Russia, about conversions, about devotion to her Immaculate Heart. The children listened, trying to absorb it all, trying to remember every word. And she reminded them again, October, the miracle, everyone will see. The crowd went home that day with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. A miracle. In October, it was a testable claim. Either something would happen or it wouldn't. There would be no room for doubt, no room for interpretation. In 1 month, they would know for certain. The children went home exhausted. They had been questioned and prodded and doubted for months now. They were tired, but they knew what was coming. In October, everything would change. Let me tell you now what the children saw that July day, what made them gasp, what made them weep, what they kept secret for 24 years before finally, under obedience to their bishop. Lucia wrote it down. The lady had been speaking to them, her voice gentle as always. And then, without warning, her expression grew serious, heavy with sorrow. I will show you something, she said. And the earth seemed to open beneath their feet. Not literally, they were still kneeling by the holm oak tree, still surrounded by thousands of people, still under the hot July sun. But in their vision, in what they were being shown, the ground opened like a mouth, like a wound, like a door into darkness. And in that darkness, they saw hell. How do you describe hell to someone who's never seen it? How do you put into words something that exists beyond words? The children tried. Years later, they said they saw a great sea of fire. Within that fire, they saw demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, floating about in the conflagration. They were raised into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves. Together with great clouds of smoke, they fell back from every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium, amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified them and made them tremble with fear. The demons were distinguishable from human souls by their terrifying and repellent likeness to frightful and unknown animals, all black and transparent. The vision lasted only a moment, but in that moment, the children understood something that many people live their whole lives without truly grasping. They understood that hell is real, that souls are really lost, that there is actual, eternal suffering for those who reject God and choose evil. Jacinta screamed, a small, sharp sound quickly stifled by her hand. Francisco went white as paper. Lucia felt as if her heart would stop beating from sheer terror. And then, just as quickly as it had opened, the vision closed. They were back in the sunlight, back in the ordinary world, back where grass grew and birds sang and everything seemed normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The lady looked at them with infinite compassion. You have seen hell, she said softly, where the souls of poor sinners go, to save them. God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. The children nodded, still trembling. They would have agreed to anything in that moment, anything to prevent souls from going to that terrible place, anything to help, anything at all. If people do what I asked, the lady continued, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. But if people do not cease offending God, a worse war will break out during the reign of Pius XI. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God that he is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and of the Holy Father. A worse war. The Great War was still raging, killing millions, and there would be something worse. The children could barely comprehend it. To prevent this, the lady said, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, She will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. The words washed over the children like cold water. Russia, consecration, wars, persecutions, martyrs, or nations annihilated. They were simple shepherd children. They barely knew where Russia was. But they understood the weight of what they were being told. The world was balanced on a knife's edge between salvation and catastrophe. In the end, the lady concluded, and her voice carried a note of triumph, of certainty, of unshakable hope. My immaculate heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. In the end, but good would win. But between now and then, there would be suffering, choices, consequences. The children left the Cova area that day changed. They had seen the stakes. They had seen what hung in the balance. They understood now why the lady kept returning, why she was so insistent, why she asked them to pray and sacrifice and offer their sufferings for the conversion of sinners. Because souls were being lost. Right now, every day, souls were falling into that sea of fire. And prayer could save them. Sacrifice could save them. Love could save them. Jacinta became obsessed with saving souls. For the rest of her short life, every discomfort, every pain, every hunger pang, she would offer up. For the conversion of sinners, she would whisper, so they won't go to hell. Francisco became even quieter, even more contemplative. He would spend hours in front of the tabernacle in the church, just keeping Jesus company. The lady said, "Jesus is so sad," he would explain. "I want to comfort him." And Lucia carried the weight of being the one who spoke to the lady, the one who received the messages, the one responsible for remembering and eventually sharing what had been revealed. It was a heavy burden for a 10-year-old girl, but she bore it with grace, with strength, with a maturity beyond her years. They told no one about the vision of hell, not yet. That was part of the secret, and they had been told to keep it secret, so they kept it locked in their hearts. A terrible knowledge that shaped every prayer, every action, every moment of their remaining lives, which The second part of the secret was given in the same conversation, flowing naturally from the first part like water flowing downstream. The lady's words about Russia, about consecration, about wars and conversions and the triumph of her immaculate heart. This was the second secret. At the time, in 1917, the children didn't fully understand it. Russia was just a name to them. They didn't know about the Bolshevik Revolution happening even as they knelt in that Portuguese field. They didn't know that the Tsar would soon be murdered, that a communist regime would take power, that millions would die in purges and famines and gulags. They didn't know that this new government would be officially atheist, would persecute believers, would close churches and execute priests and try to stamp out faith entirely. They didn't know any of this, but the lady knew, and she was warning the world. The message was clear. Russia needed to be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The Pope, together with all the bishops of the world, needed to perform this consecration. If they did, Russia would convert. If they didn't, Russia would spread its errors, atheism, materialism, persecution of religion throughout the world. The children memorized the words as best they could. Lucia especially focused on remembering every detail, every phrase, every emphasis. She knew, somehow, that these words were important, that someday someone would need to know exactly what the lady had said. The lady also spoke about the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. She would return. She said, to ask for this specifically, people should receive communion on the first Saturday of 5 consecutive months, go to confession, say the rosary, and keep her company for 15 minutes while meditating on the mysteries of the rosary. All this in reparation for sins and to console her immaculate heart. It seemed like a simple request, but the lady said it was important. Very important. If people did this, many souls would be saved. And then she made that promise. That beautiful, hope-filled promise that has sustained believers ever since. In the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. Not might triumph, not could triumph, will triumph, a certainty, absolute certainty, no matter how dark things got, no matter how much suffering lay ahead. In the end, good would win, love would win, God would win. The children clung to that promise, especially later, when things got hard, when they were mocked and doubted and persecuted, when Francisco and Jacinta lay dying, when Lucia spent decades in convents watching the world tear itself apart in war after war. That promise kept them going. In the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. And then there was the third part, the third secret. The lady told them more, something else, something so significant, so heavy, so profound that even among themselves, the children rarely spoke of it. Something that was for them alone, at least for now. What was it? What did she tell them? The children knew, but they wouldn't say. Couldn't say. Not yet. Years later, in her memoirs, Lucia would write about the first two parts of the secret in detail. She would describe the vision of hell, the prophecies about Russia, the promise of triumph. She would share these things because she was ordered to by her bishop and because the lady had not forbidden it. But about the third part, she remained silent. She would give only one hint. In her fourth memoir, written in 1941, she included this tantalizing fragment. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. That etc., that little abbreviation, it suggested there was more that she wasn't writing down, more that she was keeping back. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. But what about elsewhere? What about the rest of the world? What about the church itself? The sentence seemed to imply something dark about the state of faith outside Portugal. A crisis, perhaps, a loss of faith, a corruption of doctrine. But Lucia wouldn't elaborate. Not then, not for years to come. The three children kept the third secret locked in their hearts. It was theirs alone, a burden they shared, a knowledge that set them apart even from the believers who accepted the first two parts of the message. Sometimes, late at night, when they were together tending the sheep or hiding from the crowds, they would speak of it in whispers. Not the words themselves, those remained too sacred, too terrible to voice even in privacy, but the feeling of it, the weight of it. "Do you think about it?" Jacinta would ask. "All the time," Lucia would answer. "I pray it won't happen," Francisco would say quietly. "But if it must, I pray we'll be ready." They were just children. They should have been playing games and learning their letters and worrying about whether the sheep had enough grass. Instead, they carried knowledge that would have crushed many adults, knowledge about the future, knowledge about the church, knowledge about things so serious that the lady herself had told them it must remain secret. How long must it remain secret? They didn't know. The lady hadn't said. Just secret, for now, perhaps forever. But secrets have a way of pressing outward, of wanting to be told. And this secret, this enormous, heavy, consequential secret, would eventually demand to be revealed. Not on the children's timeline, but on heaven's. When the time was right, when it was needed, when the world was ready, or at least as ready as it ever would be. For now, though, in 1917 the children simply carried it, quietly, patiently, faithfully. Three children with a secret that would one day shake the Catholic Church to its foundations. October 13th, 1917, a date that would be remembered for over a century. A date when somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 people gathered in a muddy field in Portugal, hoping to witness a miracle. The morning started badly. It was raining, not a gentle drizzle, but a steady, soaking rain that turned the roads to mud and the Cova da Iria into a swamp. The sky was heavy with dark clouds. Water dripped from everything, from trees, from the noses of horses, from the brims of hats and the edges of umbrellas. People had been arriving for days. They came from all over Portugal, from Spain, from as far away as France. They came in cars and on trains and on foot, walking for miles through the rain. They came with sick relatives on stretchers, hoping for healing. They came with cameras and notebooks, hoping to document whatever happened. They came with faith and with doubt, with hope and with cynicism, with prayers on their lips and questions in their hearts. The crowd was immense. 70,000 people is a small city. Try to imagine that many people gathered in one place, all focused on one thing, all waiting for the same moment. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction from the small holm oak tree where the lady had appeared. Some people had brought umbrellas. Others just stood in the rain, soaking wet. Shivering, there were peasants in rough wool clothing and wealthy ladies in fine dresses, now ruined by the mud. There were priests and skeptics, journalists and believers, the curious and the devout, all mixed together in one enormous, soggy, expectant mass. The children arrived at noon, escorted by protective villagers. They looked small and fragile as they made their way through the crowd. Lucia, now 10.5 years old, leading, Francisco and Jacinta following close behind. They were soaked to the skin like everyone else. Their simple clothes clung to them. Water dripped from their hair. They knelt by the holm oak tree. The crowd pressed close, then gave way, creating a small circle of space around them. Everyone was watching, waiting. The rain continued to fall. Noon came, the appointed hour. And then the rain stopped, just like that, and as if someone had turned off a faucet. The clouds remained, dark and heavy, but the rain stopped. The crowd murmured, uncertain if this meant anything. The children's faces changed. The light had come. The lady was there. Lucia spoke, her voice barely audible to those nearby, asking the questions she always asked. "Who are you? What do you want?" And this time, the lady answered the first question fully. "I'm the Lady of the Rosary," she said. "I want a chapel built here in my honor. I want people to continue to say the Rosary every day. The war will end soon, and the soldiers will return home." The Lady of the Rosary. Finally, after 5 months, they knew her identity. She was the Blessed Virgin Mary, under her title of Our Lady of the Rosary. The children had suspected, of course, but now they knew for certain. And then she said something that both confused and saddened them. People must amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already too much offended. Her face was sad as she said this, infinitely sad, the sadness of a mother watching her children hurt themselves, watching them make choices that would lead to suffering, unable to force them to choose differently. Lucia, emboldened by the months of conversations, asked for cures, for conversions, for all the things people had been begging her to ask for. The lady answered that some would be granted, others would not. They must pray. They must have faith. They must amend their lives. And then she said, "Now, look at the sun." Those were her last words to the children. Look at the sun. And then she began to rise, moving upward toward the east as she always did, the light around her growing brighter, brighter, until she vanished into the brightness itself. Lucia, still on her knees, pointed upward and cried out to the crowd, "Look at the sun." 70,000 people looked up. What happened next has been documented by countless witnesses, believers and skeptics alike, journalists from secular newspapers, scientists, people who had come specifically hoping to debunk the whole thing. They all saw something, and they all wrote about it. Their accounts vary in details but agree on the essential facts. The clouds parted, the sun appeared, but it wasn't the normal sun. It looked like a disk of silver, spinning like a wheel. Rays of colored light, red, green, blue, violet, yellow, shot out from it in all directions, painting the crowd, the landscape, everything with shifting colors. People's faces turned red, then yellow, then blue. The trees looked purple, then green, then orange. It was as if the world had become a kaleidoscope. The sun spun faster. It seemed to be dancing, whirling, pulsating. And then, and this is what truly terrified people, it seemed to break free from its place in the sky. It appeared to plunge downward toward the earth, growing larger, coming closer, as if it were going to crash into the planet and incinerate everything. People screamed. They fell to their knees. They cried out for mercy. They confessed their sins aloud, begging for forgiveness, certain they were about to die. Some tried to run, but where could they go? If the sun was falling from the sky, where was safe? The heat seemed to increase. People felt warmth on their faces, even though moments before they had been shivering in the rain. Some thought they could feel their skin starting to burn. And then, just as suddenly, the sun stopped. It returned to its place in the sky. It became just the sun again. Normal and steady and distant and safe. The colored lights ceased, the spinning stopped. Everything was calm. The crowd stood in stunned silence for a moment. And then they began to notice something remarkable. They were dry. Completely dry. Moments before, they had been soaked to the skin, standing in puddles, mud caked on their shoes and the hems of their clothes. Now, their clothes were bone dry. The ground was dry. The trees were dry. It was as if the hours of rain had never happened. People began to shout. Some cried. Some laughed hysterically. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Some fainted from the shock of what they had just witnessed. The skeptics who had come to mock were silent, their faces pale, their minds struggling to process what they had seen. The miracle had happened, just as the lady had promised. Everyone had seen. Everyone believed. Well, almost everyone. Some people who had been watching from farther away, people who hadn't been at Cova de Ira itself, reported seeing nothing unusual. The sun looked normal to them. They saw the rain stop. But that wasn't miraculous. Rain stops all the time. They thought the crowd must be experiencing some kind of mass hysteria. But the people who were there, the 70,000 who saw it with their own eyes, knew differently. They had witnessed something impossible, something that defied the laws of nature, something that could only be described as a miracle. The newspapers covered it. O Século, Lisbon's largest and most secular newspaper, ran a front-page story before the astonished eyes of the crowd, whose aspect was biblical as they stood bareheaded, eagerly searching the sky. The sun trembled, made sudden incredible movements outside all cosmic laws. The sun danced, according to the typical expression of the people. The reporter, Avelino de Almeida, had been a skeptic. He had gone to Fatima expecting to expose a fraud. Instead, he found himself writing about something he couldn't explain, something he had seen with his own eyes but could barely believe. The miracle of the sun, the day when the impossible happened. The day when heaven reached down and touched the earth in a way that could not be denied, could not be explained away, could not be dismissed as imagination or hallucination or fraud. 70,000 witnesses, changed forever by what they had seen. And the three children at the center of it all, kneeling by a small oak tree, knowing that their lives would never be the same again. The miracle changed everything and nothing. The world now believed the children, or at least enough of the world believed that the tide had turned. The church began to take the apparitions seriously. Investigations were launched. Theologians studied the messages. The Bishop of Liria Fatima began the official inquiry process that would eventually lead to the church declaring the apparitions worthy of belief. But belief came with a price. The children's lives, which had once been simple and private, were now public property. Everyone wanted to talk to them, to touch them, to ask them questions. People came to their homes at all hours. They followed them through the streets. They treated them like living relics, grabbing at their clothes, demanding blessings, begging for miracles. Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta found themselves prisoners of their own experience. They couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. They couldn't have a moment of privacy. Every word they spoke was analyzed. Every action was watched. It was exhausting. And they were still just children. Lucia was 11. Francisco was 9. Jacinta was 8. The lady had told them they would suffer, and now they understood one way in which that suffering would manifest. Not through physical torture, not through martyrdom, but through the constant, grinding pressure of being special, of being chosen, of carrying knowledge and responsibility that made every moment heavy with significance. But there was another suffering coming, one far worse, one that would change everything. In 1918, the Spanish flu came to Portugal. It swept across the world like a scythe, killing millions. Healthy people would wake up feeling fine, be sick by afternoon, and dead by evening. It killed more people than the Great War had. It killed rich and poor, old and young, the robust and the frail. No one was safe. Francisco caught it first. Ian. The boy who had loved nature, who had played his shepherd's flute and talked to the sheep and saw visions of the Blessed Mother, fell ill. Fever consumed him. His body ached. He coughed until his chest hurt. His mother did everything she could, cool cloths, broths, prayers, tears, but the sickness was relentless. Francisco knew he was dying. The lady had told him he would go to heaven, but first he would have to pray many rosaries. He had prayed so many already, but now, in his illness, he prayed more. His lips moved constantly in prayer, even when he was too weak to hold the rosary beads, even when he could barely speak. He prayed. "I'm going to console our Lord," he whispered to Lucia when she came to visit him. His voice was so weak she had to lean close to hear. The lady said, "He's so sad. I'm going to heaven to keep him company." He lingered for months. The flu weakened him, but it was complications, pneumonia, bronchitis, his body simply giving out, that finally took him. On April 4th, 1919, just shy of his 11th birthday, Francisco Marto died. His funeral was simple, as befitted a poor shepherd boy. But in his short life, he had seen the Mother of God 6 times. He had witnessed a miracle. He had been given knowledge of heaven's plans for humanity, and now he was in heaven himself, finally able to console the Lord he had loved so much. Jacinta was devastated. Her brother, her constant companion, was gone. She wept for days, and then she too fell ill. The same flu, the same fever, the same terrible cough, but Jacinta's case was different. The flu attacked her lungs, left abscesses, complications that wouldn't heal. She lingered longer than Francisco had, suffered more. Months turned into a year, then nearly 2 years. She was sent to a hospital in Lisbon, far from home, far from her family. She was treated by doctors who didn't believe in the apparitions, who thought she was either a fraud or a fool. She endured painful medical procedures. They cut open her chest to drain the abscesses, without anesthesia because they believed children didn't feel pain as acutely as adults. They were wrong about that. Jacinta felt every cut, every probe, every moment of agony. But she offered it all up for the conversion of sinners, so they wouldn't go to hell. That vision of hell had marked her so deeply that no suffering seemed too great if it could save souls from that fate. In her final weeks, the Blessed Mother appeared to her again, privately, just to her. The lady told her she would suffer more, but that she shouldn't be afraid. Soon, very soon, she would come to heaven. The lady also told her things, prophecies, warnings, messages that Jacinta shared with Lucia during her last visit. "There will be wars," Jacinta whispered, her small face pale against the hospital pillow. "Terrible wars. Many people will die, but those who remain must pray much, but they must amend their lives. Certain fashions will be introduced that will offend our Lord very much. The sins that lead most souls to hell are the sins of the flesh. People must do penance. If they don't, the world will be punished." She spoke of priests who weren't faithful, of consecrated souls who didn't live up to their vows. She spoke of the importance of devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. She spoke and spoke, as if trying to get everything out before time ran out. On February 20th, 1920, at the age of 9 years old, Jacinta Marto died, alone in a hospital room, far from her family, but not truly alone. The lady had come for her, as she had promised. Jacinta died with a smile on her face, looking at something the nurses couldn't see. When they prepared her body for burial, they found something remarkable. Despite her illness, despite the surgery, despite nearly 2 years of suffering, her body showed no signs of decay. Her face looked peaceful. serene, almost as if she were sleeping. The smell in the room wasn't the smell of death, but something sweet, like flowers. She was buried in a simple grave, but years later, when they exhumed her body to move it to a more suitable resting place, they found that it had remained incorrupt. Her face was still intact, still beautiful, a sign, many believed, of her sanctity. And Lucia was left alone, the only one of the three seers still living. The only one who carried all the memories, all the messages, all the secrets. She was 13 years old, and she had lost her two best friends, her companions in the most extraordinary experience of her life. She grieved. How could she not? But she also knew what she had to do. She had to preserve the message. She had to remember everything the lady had told them. She had to be faithful to the mission, even though the others were gone. Her mother, who had never fully believed her, now looked at her with a mix of reverence and fear. The church was watching her. The world was watching her. Everyone wanted something from her. Answers, blessings, miracles, proof. But Lucia couldn't give them what they wanted. She could only give them what she had been given, the message. Pray the rosary, make sacrifices, amend your lives, devote yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and wait for the fulfillment of the prophecies, wait for the consecration of Russia. Wait for the triumph that had been promised. In 1925, Lucia entered religious life. She became a Dorothean sister, taking the name Sister Maria Lucia of the Sorrows. Later, she would transfer to the Carmelite order, seeking even deeper seclusion, even more protection from the constant demands of the curious world. For the next several decades, she lived a quiet life behind convent walls. She prayed. She worked. She wrote occasional letters under obedience to her spiritual directors. She tried, as much as possible, to simply be a religious sister, to live the ordinary life of prayer and service that she had always wanted. But the world wouldn't let her forget. The world needed to know. What else had the lady said? What was the third secret? When would it be revealed? Lucia kept silent. For years and years, she kept silent. She had been told to keep it secret, and she would keep it secret until she was told otherwise. But in her heart, she knew. Someday, the secret would have to be told. Someday, the world would have to know. Not yet. But someday, the lady had shown them the future, and that future was unfolding, slowly but inexorably, exactly as she had said it would. Time passed. Lucia grew from a young woman into middle age, hidden away in her convent, living a life of prayer and obedience. The world outside the convent walls was changing, and not for the better. Everything the lady had predicted was coming true. In January 1938, a strange light illuminated the night sky across Europe. An aurora borealis, scientists said, though it was far more extensive and appeared in places where such phenomena were virtually unknown. Those who remembered Fatima shivered. The lady had said, "When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God that he is about to punish the world." A year later, in 1939, World War II began, the worst war that the lady had predicted. It made the Great War look small by comparison. 50 million people would die before it ended. Cities were bombed to rubble. Entire populations were murdered in concentration camps. The horror was beyond comprehension. And Russia had spread its errors exactly as the lady had warned. The communist revolution had taken hold, and now Soviet ideology was spreading across Eastern Europe, into Asia, infecting country after country with its atheistic materialism. Churches were being destroyed. Priests were being executed. Believers were being sent to labor camps where they worked until they died. The prophecy was being fulfilled, word by word, event by event, just as the lady had said. Sister Lucia watched from her convent, praying, suffering, offering everything for the conversion of sinners, for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, for the end of the war and the conversion of Russia. And then, in 1943, she fell ill, seriously ill. The kind of illness where death feels near, where you can sense it hovering at the edge of the bed, waiting. The Bishop of Leiria Fatima, Bishop Jose de Silva, heard about her illness and became concerned. Sister Lucia was the only living witness to the Fatima apparitions. If she died, the full message would die with her. The third part of the secret, which she had never written down, which she had never told anyone, it would be lost forever. He sent her a letter, a formal command under her vow of obedience. "Write down the third secret," he ordered. "Write it down now, while you still can. Put it in a sealed envelope. It doesn't have to be opened immediately, but it must be preserved." Sister Lucia received the letter and felt a wave of distress wash over her. She had kept this secret for 26 years. 26 years of carrying it alone, of holding it close, of never speaking it aloud. And now she was being asked to write it down, to commit it to paper, to make it physical and real and potentially knowable by others. She tried. She sat at her small desk with pen and paper and tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. Her hand refused to form the letters. It was as if some invisible force was preventing her. Passed, then weeks. She tried again and again, but each time, the same blockage, the same inability to write what she knew she needed to write. She prayed. She begged God for guidance. She was under obedience. She had to write it. But she couldn't. Something was stopping her. And then, on January 2nd, 1944, the Blessed Mother came to her again. It had been 27 years since the apparitions at Fatima, but here, in the quiet of her convent cell, the lady appeared once more, beautiful, radiant, kind, just as she had been all those years ago when Lucia was a child. "Heaven wishes you to write it," the lady told her gently. "Write it down, and have your confessor keep it sealed. But tell him that it is to be opened and read either at your death or in 1960, whichever comes first." 1960, a specific date, 16 years in the future. Why 1960? The lady didn't explain. But the date was clear, unmistakable, 1960. With the lady's permission, the blockage broke. On January 9th, 1944, Sister Lucia sat down and wrote. Her hand flew across the paper, forming words she had held silent for so long, the third part of the secret. The final piece of the message given at Fatima. She wrote it on a single sheet of paper at 25 lines, according to those who later saw the sealed envelope held up to the light, short, concise, but devastating in its implications. When she finished, she folded the paper and placed it in an envelope. Then she sealed the envelope and on the outside wrote instructions. It was to be opened in 1960 or at her death, whichever came first. She gave the envelope to Bishop de Silva with trembling hands. "It is done," she said simply. The bishop accepted it, sensing the weight of what he held. He did not open it. He had been told not to. He locked it away in his safe, where it would remain for the next 13 years passés. And Sister Lucia went back to her quiet life, relieved of one burden but still carrying the weight of knowledge. She knew what was in that envelope. She knew what the world would learn someday. She knew, and she prayed that when the time came, when 1960 arrived and the secret was opened, people would listen, would understand, would act, but for now, the secret was safe, written down, so preserved, waiting for 1960 when everything would change. The years rolled on. World War II ended in 1945, leaving the world exhausted, traumatized, and divided. The Cold War began. Exactly as the lady had predicted, Russia spreading its errors, the world split between communist East and democratic West, the threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over everything. Sister Lucia remained in her convent, praying for peace, for conversion, for the fulfillment of the lady's promises. The sealed envelope remained in the bishop's safe in Leiria Fatima, unopened, waiting for 1960. But in 1957, something changed. The Vatican became concerned. Portugal was a small country. What if there was a revolution? What if the communists took over, as they had in so many other places? What if the bishop's residence was ransacked and the envelope was lost or destroyed? Pope Pius XII sent orders. The envelope was to be transferred to Rome, to the Vatican itself, where it would be safe. The Holy Office, the Vatican department responsible for matters of faith and doctrine, would keep it secure. Bishop de Silva complied. On March 16, 1957, the sealed envelope began its journey to Rome. Before it left, Auxiliary Bishop John Venancio held it up to a strong light. He could see the paper inside through the envelope. One sheet, folded, with approximately 25 lines of text and margins of about 3/4 of a centimeter on either side. He noted this carefully, writing it down for the record. The envelope arrived in Rome and was delivered to the Holy Office. Pope Pius XII took personal custody of it. It was placed in a small wooden safe in the papal apartments, a safe bearing the inscription Secretum Sancti Officii, Secret of the Holy Office. In May 1957, a journalist named Robert Serrou was doing a photo story on the papal apartments. The Pope's German housekeeper, Mother Pasqualina, was showing him around. As they walked through the rooms, Serrou noticed the small wooden safe on a table. "What's in there?" he asked casually. Mother Pasqualina glanced at the safe, then at him. She seemed to debate whether to answer. Then, perhaps feeling that a sealed secret was safe to mention, she said simply, "The Third Secret of Fatima is in there." The Third Secret of Fatima. In a safe in the Pope's own apartments, Serrou felt a chill run through him. He wanted to ask more questions, but Mother Pasqualina had already moved on, pointing out other features of the rooms. The story got out, of course. Journalists being journalists, Serrou wrote about it. The world now knew that the Pope had the secret, that it was in Rome, that it existed in physical form, written down, preserved, waiting. But the Pope didn't open it. At least, there's no record that he did. Perhaps he was waiting for 1960, the date Sister Lucia had specified. Perhaps he felt it wasn't his decision to make. Perhaps he simply wanted to respect the seal, the sanctity of the secret itself. In October 1958, Pope Pius XII died. He had reigned for 19 years, guiding the Church through World War II and the early Cold War. He had read the first 2 parts of the Fatima Secret. He had promoted devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But if he read the 3rd part, he never spoke of it publicly. The new Pope, John XXIII, took office in October 1958. He was older, in his 70s, elected as a transitional pope who would reign briefly and make no major changes. But John XXIII surprised everyone. He was warm, jovial, progressive. He called for the Second Vatican Council, a gathering of bishops that would modernize the Church and open it to the contemporary world. And in 1959, as 1960 approached, Pope John XXIII ordered the envelope containing the Third Secret to be brought to him. The moment had almost arrived. The date Sister Lucia had specified, the date when the secret was supposed to be revealed to the world. 1960 was coming. The world waited. Catholics around the globe marked their calendars. 1960, the year they would finally learn what the lady had told the children back in 1917. The year the mystery would be solved. The year the Third Secret would be revealed. Interest in Fatima had never been higher. The first 2 parts of the secret had been published in Lucia's memoirs in the 1940s, and they had proven remarkably accurate. The vision of hell was theologically sound. The prophecy about World War II had come true. The warnings about Russia spreading its errors were playing out in real time as communism expanded across the globe. So what was the 3rd part? What could be so important, so significant, that it had been kept secret for over 40 years? What had the lady said that was for 1960 specifically? Speculation ran wild. Some thought it would be a prophecy about the end of the world. Others guessed it would reveal the exact date of Russia's conversion. Still others thought it might contain criticisms of the Church itself, warnings about corruption or heresy or schism. Religious publications wrote articles counting down to the revelation. Prayer groups organized vigils. Fatima devotees planned pilgrimages for the moment when the secret would be made public. January 1960 came. Nothing happened. February. Nothing but March, April, May. The Vatican remained silent. June, July, August, there's no announcement, no press conference, no publication, just Silence. People began to wonder, had something gone wrong? Had the envelope been lost? Was the Vatican having trouble deciphering Sister Lucia's handwriting? And then, on February 8, 1960, a brief announcement came from the Vatican press office. It was terse, official, disappointing. It is most likely that the secret will remain, forever, under absolute seal. Forever. The word hit like a hammer. Not delayed, not postponed, forever. The Vatican was not going to reveal the third secret. Not in 1960. Not ever. The disappointment was crushing. People felt betrayed. Why had Sister Lucia specified 1960 if the secret wasn't going to be revealed then? Why had the Vatican let expectations build if they had no intention of fulfilling them? Questions flooded in. Vatican spokesman released another statement trying to clarify. Although the Church recognizes the Fatima apparitions, it does not desire to take the responsibility of guaranteeing the veracity of the words which the three shepherds said that the Virgin Mary had addressed to them. In other words, we believe the children saw something, but we're not committing to the accuracy of what they heard. It was a careful, diplomatic non-answer, and it only raised more questions. Behind the scenes, what had actually happened to Pope John XXIII had opened the envelope in August 1959. He read the contents, according to later reports. He read it with his Portuguese translator, Monsignor Paulo José Tavares, and with Cardinal Alfredo Ottavani, the head of the Holy Office. The Pope's reaction, according to those present, was profound. He went pale. He read it once, then again. Then he sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully measured. This does not concern my pontificate. What did he mean? That the prophecy was about a future pope? That the events described would happen after his death? That it wasn't his responsibility to deal with? He also reportedly said, "The secret must be kept. It cannot be published." And then he made a decision. He would not open the secret to the world. He would seal it again and return it to the Holy Office archive. Perhaps a future pope would decide differently, but not him, not now. His reasoning, never fully explained, seemed to involve several factors. First, the secret was disturbing, very disturbing, said. Publishing it would cause panic, confusion, possibly even scandal. And second, it involved internal church matters that the church traditionally did not air publicly. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he worried that publishing it would fuel what he saw as dangerous, apocalyptic thinking among the faithful. Unhealthy obsessions with end-times prophecies rather than faith lived in the present. So the envelope went back into the archives. The secret remained secret. And the world was left to wonder and speculate and increasingly to doubt. If the secret was just about Russia converting, or about the assassination attempt on a pope, or about some other relatively straightforward prophecy, why not publish it? Why hide it? The fact that it was being hidden suggested it was something else, something more troubling. Something the Vatican didn't want the world to know. And that's when the real speculation began. The theories, the leaked documents, the claims and counterclaims, the decades-long controversy that would shake the Church and fuel conspiracy theories for generations to come. Sister Lucia, asked later why 1960 was specified, gave a simple answer. Because the Blessed Virgin wishes it so. But that didn't explain why the Virgin would wish it if the Church was just going to ignore her wish. Unless the Virgin knew that's what would happen. Unless 1960 was important not because the secret would be revealed, but because it would be hidden. And that hiding, that refusal, was itself part of the message. The year 1960 passed. The secret remained secret, and slowly, gradually, a question began to form in people's minds. What could be so terrible that the Vatican would rather break a promise than reveal it? Pope John XXIII died in 1963. His successor, Pope Paul VI, also read the Third Secret, and like John XXIII before him, he chose not to publish it. In 1967, Cardinal Ottaviani gave a speech at a Fatima conference. He was asked about the secret. He confirmed that both John the III and Paul VI had read it. He said it was terrible and involved things that will happen to the Church. But he offered no details. Things that will happen to the Church, not to the world, not to nations, to the Church itself. Those words sent a shiver through Catholic circles, a prophecy about the Church, about internal problems, about something wrong at the very heart of the institution that claimed to be Christ's representative on earth. What could it be? Heresy, schism, corruption, apostasy? The Second Vatican Council had concluded in 1965, bringing sweeping changes to Catholic practice. The Latin Mass was replaced with vernacular liturgies. Priests turned to face the congregation. Nuns abandoned their traditional habits. Church architecture modernized. Relations with other Christian denominations and even other religions became more open. For many traditional Catholics, these changes felt like a betrayal of everything they had known. The Church they loved seemed to be disappearing, being replaced by something new and unfamiliar. They began to wonder, was this what the Third Secret warned about? Changes in the Church that would lead people away from true faith? In 1963, a German newspaper called Neues Europa published what it claimed was the text of the Third Secret, leaked from diplomatic sources. According to this text, the secret warned of a great apostasy, of cardinals opposing cardinals and bishops opposing bishops, of Satan infiltrating the Church to its highest levels, of Rome losing the faith and becoming the seat of the Antichrist. The Vatican never officially denied this text, but they never confirmed it either. The silence itself was telling. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, various cardinals and Vatican officials made cryptic comments about the secret. Cardinal Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, the renamed Holy Office, said in a 1984 interview that he had read it, and it dealt with dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore the world. He also said the decision not to publish it was to avoid confusing religious prophecy with sensationalism. But if avoiding sensationalism was the goal, keeping it secret was having the opposite effect. The mystery was creating far more speculation and sensationalism than any actual text could have. Sister Lucia continued to live her quiet life in the Carmelite convent in Coimbra, Portugal. She was occasionally visited by bishops and cardinals who wanted to ask her about the secret, but she would only say that she had written down everything she was supposed to write down. The rest was up to the Holy Father. If the Pope decided to publish it, fine. If not, also fine. She had done her duty. The responsibility was no longer hers. In 1981, Pope John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square, the assassination attempt. On May 13th, the anniversary of the first Fatima apparition seemed too significant to be coincidence. The Pope himself attributed his survival to the Blessed Virgin's intercession. One hand fired today, he said later, but another hand guided the bullet. Many believed this was the fulfillment of the Third Secret's prophecy. A pope struck down but surviving. The bishop dressed in white falling under gunfire. The mystery solved. But others weren't convinced. If that was what the secret was about, an assassination attempt that failed, why had it been kept hidden for so long? Why the secrecy? Why couldn't it have been published after the event, once it was clear what it referred to? Unless it referred to something else or something more. In 1984, Pope John Paul II performed a consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It wasn't exactly what the lady had asked for. She had specifically requested the consecration of Russia, by name, by the Pope in union with all the bishops of the world. This consecration mentioned the world, humanity, but not Russia specifically. And not all bishops participated in it. Still, many Fatima devotees hoped it was enough. Perhaps it counted. Perhaps it would bring about the conversion of Russia and the period of peace the lady had promised. And remarkably, just a few years later, the Soviet Union began to collapse. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe crumbled. By 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. Russia was no longer officially atheist. Churches reopened. Bibles were printed. The persecution stopped. Had the consecration worked, even if imperfect? Or was this just historical coincidence? People debated, but the undeniable fact remained. The Cold War ended. The communist threat receded. The lady's prophecy about Russia seemed to be coming true. But what about the third secret? If Russia's conversion was part of the second secret, and that had now happened, what was left? What was the third part still warning about? Sister Lucia was asked again and again. Had the consecration been done correctly? Had Russia truly been consecrated? She gave ambiguous answers, sometimes seeming to confirm it, other times suggesting it wasn't quite right yet, that it needed to be done more specifically, more exactly as the lady had requested. The controversy continued. The speculation grew. Books were written. Conferences were held. Fatima devotees argued among themselves about what the secret contained, whether it had been fulfilled, whether the church was suppressing information the faithful had a right to know. And through it all, Sister Lucia prayed. She grew older, from a young nun to a middle-aged woman to an elderly sister with white hair and deep wrinkles earned from decades of prayer and contemplation. She had carried the secret for so long now. 80 years. 80 years since that day in May 1917, when she was just a child and the lady had appeared and changed her life forever. She must have wondered sometimes if the secret would outlive her, if she would die without ever seeing it published, if her death would be the trigger that finally forced its revelation. But the Vatican showed no signs of changing course. The secret remained locked away, official, sacred, untouchable, until, finally, as the millennium turned and the year 2000 approached, something shifted. Pope John Paul II, who had survived the assassination attempt, who had consecrated the world to Mary, who had seen the collapse of communism in his lifetime, made a decision. It was time to finally reveal the third secret of Fatima. After 83 years, the world was about to learn what the lady had told the children. Or so everyone thought. The new millennium dawned with celebration around the world. The year 2000, a new century, a new era, hope for the future mixed with reflection on the past. For the Catholic Church, the millennium was especially significant. Pope John Paul II had declared it a Jubilee year, a holy year, a time of pilgrimage and renewal and grace. Special events were planned throughout the year. Special graces were promised. It was a time to look forward while remembering the 2,000 years of Christian history that had come before. And among all the millennial celebrations, one event stood out for those who followed Fatima: the beatification of Francisco and Jacinta Marto. The two shepherd children who had died so young, who had suffered so much, who had seen the Mother of God and carried her secrets, they were being declared blessed. Not yet saints, but one step away, recognized officially by the Church as models of holiness, as examples of faith, as souls now in heaven interceding for the faithful on earth. The beatification was scheduled for May 13, 2000, the anniversary of the first apparition. 83 years to the day after the lady first appeared to the children. The ceremony would be held at Fatima itself, at the Cova da Iria, where the apparitions had occurred, where the home oak tree had once stood, where 70,000 people had witnessed the miracle of the sun. The site was now a massive basilica complex, one of the world's most important Marian shrines, visited by millions of pilgrims each year. Pope John Paul II would preside at the beatification. It would be his third visit to Fatima, a place that held special meaning for him ever since the assassination attempt on May 13, 1981. He believed the Blessed Virgin had saved his life that day. He had a bullet from the shooting set into the crown of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima as a thank offering. And on this visit, he had decided he would finally make public the third secret. The announcement came in late April, during the beatification ceremony. Cardinal Angelo Sodano, Vatican Secretary of State, would reveal the essential contents of the third secret. The full text would be published shortly afterwards. The news spread like wildfire. After 4 decades of secrecy, after countless theories and speculation and controversy, the secret would finally be revealed. The Catholic world held its breath. May 13th arrived. The day was warm and bright. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims packed the massive square at Fatima. They had come from all over the world, Portugal and Brazil, Poland and the Philippines, the United States and Uganda. Every nation represented, every language spoken, all gathered to witness this historic moment. The Beatification Mass was beautiful, moving. Pope John Paul II, now elderly and showing the effects of Parkinson's disease, presided with dignity despite his physical struggles. The 2 children who had died so young, Francisco at 10, Jacinta at 9, were declared blessed. Their short lives of suffering and devotion were held up as examples for all the faithful. And then, toward the end of the Mass, Cardinal Sodano stepped to the microphone. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Cardinal spoke slowly, clearly, in Italian. He first noted that Sister Lucia had agreed that the time had come to reveal the secret. Then he began to describe its contents. The secret, he said, was primarily a vision, a symbolic vision of the suffering of the Church in the 20th century. The children had seen an angel with a flaming sword, ready to set the world on fire. But the flames were held back by the radiance from the Blessed Virgin's hand. Then they saw a bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father, making his way with great difficulty toward a cross at the top of a mountain. Along the way, he passed through a city half in ruins, filled with corpses. Soldiers shot arrows and bullets at him. Finally, under the cross, he fell to the ground, apparently dead. Similarly, other bishops, priests, religious men and women, and various laypersons also climbed the mountain. They too were killed by the soldiers. That was the vision. That was the third secret. Cardinal Sodano then offered an interpretation. The bishop in white was Pope John Paul II. The secret had predicted the assassination attempt of May 13, 1981. The Pope had been shot, had nearly died, but had been saved by the Virgin's intercession. The city in ruins represented the suffering of the 20th century, 2 world wars, totalitarian regimes, persecutions. The martyred clergy and laity represented all those who had died for their faith under communist and Nazi regimes. It was, Cardinal Sodano concluded, a vision of the past, not the future. The events it described had already happened. The secret no longer held warnings for things to come, but rather confirmed things that had already occurred. It was closed, complete, finished. The crowd listened in respectful silence. When Cardinal Sodano finished, there was polite applause. But underneath the politeness, many people felt confused, disappointed, even cheated. That was it? That was the great secret that had been kept hidden for 40 years. A vision of a pope being shot, described in symbolic language? It didn't seem like enough. It didn't explain why the secrecy. It didn't explain Pope John XIII's reported words. This does not concern my pontificate. It didn't explain why successive popes had refused to publish it for 4 decades. And more importantly, where were the words? Sister Lucia had said in her memoirs that after showing them the vision of hell, the Blessed Virgin had spoken to them, had given them a message that began, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, and etc. The etc. implied there was more words, more message, more explanation. But Cardinal Sodano had described only a vision. No words, no verbal message, just symbolic images of suffering. Was that really all? Or was there more that still hadn't been revealed? The pilgrims at Fatima that day went home with mixed feelings. Joy at the beatification of Francisco and Jacinta, but also confusion and disappointment about the third secret. It felt incomplete. It felt like something was missing. The Vatican promised that the full text would be published soon, along with scholarly commentary explaining its meaning and context. Perhaps that would answer the lingering questions. But many Fatima devotees had a sinking feeling that the questions were only just beginning. On June 26, 2000, the Vatican held a press conference. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith released a document titled The Message of Fatima. It contained photocopies of the original handwritten text of the Third Secret, along with translations and theological commentary. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, prefect of the congregation and future Pope Benedict XVI, presided at the press conference. Also present was Archbishop Tarcisio Bertone, who had recently visited Sister Lucia to discuss the secret with her. The room was packed with journalists, Catholic and secular alike. Cameras flashed, microphones recorded, this was news. Cardinal Ratzinger began by managing expectations. He said quite bluntly, a careful reading of the text of the so-called Third Secret of Fatima will probably prove disappointing or surprising after all the speculation it has stirred. No great mystery is revealed, nor is the future unveiled. No great mystery. The Cardinal was essentially saying, lower your expectations. This isn't going to be what you think it is. Then he presented the text itself. The handwritten pages by Sister Lucia, photographed and reproduced in the document. The shaky handwriting of an elderly nun, writing in Portuguese, describing what she had seen as a child 83 years earlier. The text matched what Cardinal Sodano had described in May. A vision, an angel with a flaming sword, a bishop in white climbing a mountain, a city in ruins, corpses and soldiers shooting, the bishop falling dead, other clergy and laity also killed. That was it. 4 pages of handwritten text, describing the vision in more detail than Cardinal Sodano's summary, but essentially the same content. And crucially, no accompanying words. No verbal message from the Blessed Virgin explaining the vision. No continuation of the phrase, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Just the vision. Silent, symbolic, open to interpretation. Cardinal Ratzinger provided that interpretation in a lengthy theological commentary. He explained that private revelations like Fatima are not meant to be read as newspaper articles, predicting specific events. Rather, they're symbolic, poetic, meant to mobilize prayer and conversion. They show possibilities, not inevitabilities. They warn of what could happen if humanity doesn't change, not what must happen. The vision of the suffering Pope, Ratzinger argued, referred to the martyrdom of Christians in the 20th century, all the millions killed under totalitarian regimes. The Pope climbing toward the cross represented the Church's journey through suffering. The fact that the Pope fell but presumably rose again, since John Paul II survived, showed God's mercy and the power of prayer. It was, Ratzinger concluded, essentially a call to conversion, to prayer, to penance. Not a prediction of specific future events, but a warning about the consequences of sin and the power of grace. The commentary was scholarly, thoughtful, theologically sophisticated. It placed Fatima in the larger context of Catholic teaching about private revelation, about prophecy, about how God communicates with His Church. But for many people, it didn't answer the fundamental questions. Where were the words? Why did Sister Lucia's earlier memoirs reference words from the Virgin that weren't in this published text? Why did the published vision seem so different from the first 2 secrets, which had been mostly verbal messages with some visual elements? And perhaps most importantly, if this vision was just about events that had already happened, why had it been kept secret for so long? Why couldn't it have been published in 1960 as requested? Why the 40 years of silence? Cardinal Ratzinger's commentary went to great lengths to explain how the vision should be understood. He emphasized several key points. First, private revelations. Even those approved by the Church are not the same as public revelation. Public revelation, scripture and sacred tradition, is closed, complete, authoritative. Private revelations are helps, aids to faith, but not binding on all believers. You can be a good Catholic without believing in Fatima. Second, prophetic visions are not like photographs of the future. They're symbolic, requiring interpretation. The bishop in white doesn't necessarily mean a specific pope. The city in ruins doesn't necessarily mean a specific place. These are images representing broader realities: suffering, persecution, martyrdom, Israel. Third, the purpose of such revelations is not to satisfy curiosity about the future, but to mobilize the forces of change in the present. The vision is meant to make people pray more, convert more deeply, live more faithfully. It's a call to action, not a roadmap of inevitable events. Fourth, we must avoid fatalistic interpretations. The vision shows what could happen, what might happen if humanity continues on a destructive path. But it's not predetermined. Human freedom still matters. Prayer still matters. Choices still matter. The future is not fixed. Finally, Ratzinger emphasized that the vision should be read in light of the first two secrets. All three parts are interconnected. The vision of hell shows the stakes. Souls are really lost. The prophecy about Russia shows that historical events unfold according to divine providence, but also in response to human choices. And this third vision shows the cost of faithfulness. The church will suffer. Believers will be martyred. But in the end, God's purposes will prevail. It was a sophisticated reading, nuanced, careful not to claim too much or too little. But it left room for disagreement, and disagree people did. Some accepted the Vatican's interpretation completely. They believed the secret had been revealed, that it referred to 20th century persecutions, particularly the assassination attempt on John Paul II, and that there was nothing more to know. Case closed, mystery solved, move on. Others were deeply skeptical. They pointed to inconsistencies. They noted that earlier Vatican statements had suggested the secret contained words, not just a vision. They observed that the published text seemed too simple, too straightforward, to justify 40 years of secrecy. They wondered if there was another document, another page, another secret within the secret. And a third group took a middle position. They accepted that the Vatican had published something authentic, but they believed it was incomplete. Not that the Vatican was lying, but that they were perhaps sharing only part of the secret, holding back another part for reasons they deemed prudent. To settle the controversy, Archbishop Bertone visited Sister Lucia again. This was in November 2001. Sister Lucia was now 94 years old, still living in her Carmelite convent, still praying, still faithful. Bertone came with this published document. He showed it to her. "Is this your handwriting?" he asked. Sister Lucia touched the pages, studied them. "Yes," she said, "this is my writing." "Is this the third secret?" "Yes, this is the third secret." "Did you write any other text? Is there anything else?" "No, I never wrote another text. Listen, this is everything." "Oh." "To those who claim there's something more, what do you say?" Sister Lucia was clear. There is no truth in this. Everything has been published. No secret remains. Her words were reported in a Vatican communiqué dated December 20th, 2001. Sister Lucy, Secret of Fatima contains no more mysteries. For believers in the official version, this settled it. Sister Lucia herself had confirmed it. She had no reason to lie. She was under no pressure from the Vatican. She lived in a convent in Portugal, not in Vatican City, and was protected by her order. If there was something more, she would have said so. But skeptics weren't convinced. Some claimed Sister Lucia was too old, that she might be confused or manipulated. Others pointed to earlier interviews where her answers about the secret seemed more ambiguous. Still others went so far as to claim that the real Sister Lucia had died years ago and been replaced by an impostor, a theory so wild that even most Fatima devotees dismissed it as absurd. The controversy wouldn't die. Books continued to be written. Websites proliferated. Conferences debated. Some Catholics became obsessed with the idea that the Vatican was hiding something, that there was a fourth secret or a missing part of the third secret, that the published text was a cover-up. The Vatican, for its part, maintained a patient silence. They had published what they said was the complete secret. Sister Lucia had confirmed it. The matter was closed. If people wanted to continue speculating, that was their choice. But the Church had nothing more to say. And through it all, Sister Lucia continued her quiet life of prayer. She didn't give more interviews. She didn't write more memoirs. She didn't engage with the controversies swirling around her. She just prayed, day after day, year after year, for the conversion of sinners, for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, for peace in the world. She had done what she was asked to do. She had written down the secret. She had confirmed the published version. The rest was not her responsibility. In 2005, on February 13th, Sister Maria Lucia of the Sorrows died. She was 97 years old. She had lived for 88 years after seeing the Blessed Virgin Mary. She had kept the secret for 61 years before writing it down. She had watched the world change, had seen wars and peace, had witnessed the collapse of communism and the digital revolution, had lived through the pontificates of 12 different popes. And now she was gone. The last living link to the Fatima apparitions. The last person who had actually been there, who had actually seen, who had actually heard it. If there were more to tell, she took it with her to heaven. If the published secret was complete, then the mystery was solved. But for many, the questions remained, and remain to this day. Because some mysteries don't resolve simply because you're given an answer. Sometimes the answer just raises more questions. Sometimes the explanation just deepens the mystery. And sometimes, perhaps, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. Let's go back to something small, something easy to miss, a little abbreviation in a document written in 1941. Sister Lucia, writing her fourth memoir at the request of her bishop, included a fragment that seemed to be the beginning of the third secret. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. etc. 3 letters, 1 abbreviation. It means etc., and so forth, and so on. And the rest, it indicates that there's more to come, more that's being left out for now. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. But the published Third Secret, released in 2000, contains no words at all. It's purely a vision, images of suffering and martyrdom, but no verbal message from the Blessed Virgin to accompany it. So where are the words? Where is the continuation of that sentence? In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. But what about elsewhere? What about the rest of the world? What about the rest of the Church? The implication is clear enough. If in Portugal the dogma will be preserved, then perhaps in other places it won't be. Perhaps in other parts of the Church, the faith will be corrupted, lost, betrayed. This would be an extraordinarily serious prophecy. It would suggest that the Catholic Church itself, the institution founded by Christ, guided by the Holy Spirit, guaranteed by Jesus' promise that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, that this Church would fall into error, at least in some places, at least for some time. No wonder the Vatican might hesitate to publish such a message. It would shake the faithful to their core. It would fuel every anti-Catholic conspiracy theory. It would give ammunition to those who already claimed the Church had fallen into apostasy. But the etc. is there, in black and white, in Sister Lucia's own handwriting from 1941. It's in the published memoirs. Anyone can read it, and it clearly implies that there's more to the message than just, in Portugal, the dogma will be preserved. The Vatican has offered explanations. Cardinal Bertone, in his book The Last Secret of Fatima, published in 2007, argued that the etc. doesn't indicate missing text. Rather, It's Sister Lucia's way of saying she didn't want to write more in that particular memoir. The full message, he argued, is contained in the vision that was published in 2000. The vision is the continuation. The vision is what comes after the etc. But this explanation doesn't quite satisfy. Visions and words are different things. The first two secrets contained both verbal messages from the Virgin and visions like the image of hell. If the third secret begins with words, in Portugal, it seems logical that it would continue with more words, not suddenly switch to a purely visual symbolic vision. In 1952, a Jesuit priest named Father Schweigel was sent by Pope Pius XII to interview Sister Lucia in her convent. The visit was secret, but Father Schweigel later revealed some of what he learned. According to Schweigel, Sister Lucia told him that the third secret has two parts. One part concerns the Pope. The other part contains the words of the Blessed Virgin, the continuation of, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Two parts, one vision, one verbal message, yay. The Vatican published one part in 2000, the vision of the suffering Pope. But where is the other part? Where are the Virgin's words? Cardinal Bertone disputed Father Schweigel's account, suggesting he had been misunderstood or misquoted. But Schweigel's testimony exists in multiple sources, given before the 2000 publication, when there would have been no reason for him to fabricate such details. Moreover, there's physical evidence to consider. Bishop Venancio, who examined the sealed envelope in 1957 before it was sent to Rome, held it up to a strong light and could see through it. He reported seeing one sheet of paper with approximately 25 lines of text. One sheet had 25 lines. But Sister Lucia had written in 1944 that she recorded the secret in two places, in a sealed envelope, and in her personal notebook. The envelope was sent to the bishop. But what happened to the notebook? What was written there? Some Fatima scholars believe there were actually two documents. One containing the vision, this would be the sheet Venancio saw, the one that was eventually published in 2000. The other containing the words of the Virgin, this would be in the notebook, or perhaps in a separate envelope, and this is what has never been published. This theory would explain many things. Why the published text seems incomplete. Why earlier Vatican officials spoke as if the secret contained verbal warnings about the Church. Why Sister Lucia referenced words that don't appear in the published document. But the Vatican denies this. Archbishop Bertone, in multiple statements and in his 2007 book, insisted there is only one document, only one secret, only one text, and it has been fully published. Who is right? Without access to the Vatican archives, without being able to examine all the original documents, it's impossible to say with certainty. But the questions linger, and the etc. remain, unexplained, hanging in the air like a question mark. Over the years, various texts claiming to be the real third secret have circulated. The most famous appeared in a German magazine called Neues Europa in October 1963. The magazine's editor, Louis Emmerich, claimed to have obtained the text from Vatican diplomatic sources. He said the text he was publishing was not the exact original, he didn't have access to that, but rather a summary of the key points, as circulated among certain diplomatic circles in Washington, London, and Moscow. According to this leaked text, the third secret warned of a great apostasy starting at the top of the Church. It spoke of Satan entering the Church, of cardinals opposing cardinals and bishops opposing bishops, of doctrinal errors spreading, of faith dying out in many nations, of Rome losing the faith and becoming the seat of the Antichrist. It predicted a catastrophic war that would wipe out much of humanity, nuclear war implied, though not stated directly. It spoke of fire falling from the sky, of oceans boiling, of nations disappearing. It warned that only faith and devotion to the Immaculate Heart could prevent these calamities. The text was apocalyptic, terrifying, exactly the kind of thing that would explain why the Vatican kept it secret. Emmerich claimed he had conferred extensively with a priest from Rome before publishing the text. He reprinted it in 1970 and again claimed Vatican sources had confirmed its essential accuracy, even if not word for word exact. The Vatican never officially denied the Neues Europa text. They never confirmed it either. They simply ignored it, which some took as tacit confirmation and others took as dismissal through silence. Critics of the Neues Europa text point out problems. It assigns the secret to the October apparition, not the July one where it was actually given. It uses language and concepts that seem more 1960s than 1917. It reads like something written after Vatican II, reflecting concerns about the Council's reforms, rather than something from before World War I. But supporters argue that these are exactly the kind of changes you'd expect in a summary that's been translated, paraphrased, and passed through multiple hands. The core message, they say, is authentic even if the exact wording isn't. Without access to the original documents, without knowing who Emmerich's sources really were, it's impossible to verify or debunk the text conclusively. But it's worth noting, the Neues Europa text describes apocalyptic catastrophes on a scale that hasn't happened. If this was the real secret, it was either wrong, which would discredit Fatima entirely, or it describes events still to come, which would mean the secret isn't about the past, as the Vatican claims, but about the future. Or perhaps, and this is what some believe, perhaps the catastrophes were conditional. Perhaps they were warnings of what would happen if humanity didn't convert, if Russia wasn't properly consecrated, if the Church didn't reform. And perhaps enough people prayed, enough grace was released, enough was done to prevent the worst outcomes. The lady had said, "After all, if my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church." Conditional prophecy. Not "this will happen," but "this will happen if." And the "if" depends on human choices, human prayers, and human faithfulness. Maybe we avoided the apocalypse by a hair's breadth. Maybe it was closer than we know. Maybe the prayers of the faithful, the devotions to Mary, the rosaries said by millions, maybe they turned the tide just enough. Or maybe the Neues Europa text is simply wrong. A fabrication, a well-meaning attempt to fill the vacuum of knowledge, but not based on anything real. We don't know. We can't know. Not without the original documents, but not without Vatican transparency. And therein lies the problem. Many traditional Catholics believe the Third Secret is about the Second Vatican Council and its aftermath. Vatican II, which met from 1962 to 1965, was the most significant gathering of bishops since the Council of Trent in the 16th century. It brought sweeping changes to Catholic practice and teaching. The Mass was translated from Latin into vernacular languages. Priests began facing the congregation instead of facing east toward the tabernacle. Church architecture modernized. Ecumenical outreach to other Christians and other religions increased. The role of laity expanded. For many Catholics, these changes were liberating, renewing, spirit-led. The Church was finally engaging with the modern world instead of hiding from it. But for many traditional Catholics, the changes felt like betrayal. The ancient liturgy they loved was being stripped away. Sacred traditions were being discarded. The Church was compromising with the secular world instead of standing firm against it. And the statistics seemed to support their concerns. After Vatican II, church attendance dropped dramatically in the West. Vocations to priesthood and religious life plummeted. Theological dissent became common even among priests and theologians. Polls showed many Catholics no longer believed basic doctrines like the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Was this the loss of faith the Third Secret warned about? Was this the dogma of the faith not being preserved outside Portugal? Some scholars point to statements by various cardinals and popes that seem to support this connection. Pope Paul VI, In 1972, spoke of the smoke of Satan entering the church. Cardinal Ratzinger, before becoming pope, spoke of a silent apostasy in Europe, of entire nations losing their Christian identity. Were they referring to the Third Secret? Were they acknowledging, in coded language, that the prophecy was about internal church problems, not external persecutions? Father Joaquin Alonso spent 16 years as the official archivist of Fatima, studying all of Sister Lucia's writings and all the documentation. He concluded that the Third Secret concerned a crisis of faith within the Church and internal conflicts among Catholics. His findings were restricted and never fully published during his lifetime. He died in 1981, just before the Vatican might have been ready to release more information. Why restrict his work? Why not let the official archivist publish his conclusions? Unless, of course, those conclusions were uncomfortable. Unless they suggested the secret was about problems within the church hierarchy itself. And then there's an even stranger controversy, one that ventures into territory that seems almost too bizarre to be true, yet has been argued by some researchers with apparent seriousness. The claim, Sister Lucia was replaced by an impostor sometime in the late 1950s or early 1960s. The evidence presented, photographs of Sister Lucia before 1960 and after 1960 show dramatic differences in facial features, different nose shape, different jaw structure, different ears, different handwriting in some documents, different signature style. Medical and forensic experts, at least people claiming such expertise, have analyzed the photographs and declared they show two different women. The theory: the real Sister Lucia either died or was somehow incapacitated, and the Vatican replaced her with a lookalike who would say whatever they wanted her to say. This impostor confirmed the Vatican's version of the Third Secret in 2001, but the real Lucia would never have done so. Most people, even most Fatima devotees, dismiss this theory as absurd. Faces change with age, photographs from different angles, with different lighting, with decades between them, naturally look different. Handwriting evolves over time, especially in someone who lived to be 97 years old. The theory requires a conspiracy so vast, so complex, so carefully maintained over decades, involving so many people: the Vatican, Lucia's religious order, doctors, photographers, everyone who met her, that it seems impossible. And yet the theory persists. Websites are dedicated to it. Books have been written about it. The photographs are endlessly analyzed and compared. Why do some people believe it? Perhaps because it offers an explanation for all the inconsistencies. If there are contradictions in what Sister Lucia said at different times, it's because they're different people. If the published secret doesn't match earlier descriptions, it's because the impostor lied. It's a theory that can't be disproven without exhuming Sister Lucia's body and doing DNA testing, something the Church shows no inclination to do. So it remains in the realm of speculation, accepted by a small minority, rejected by most, but impossible to conclusively settle. What's perhaps more significant than whether the theory is true is that some people believe it. That some faithful Catholics are so convinced the Vatican is hiding something that they're willing to entertain even this extreme possibility. It speaks to a crisis of trust, a sense that the hierarchy cannot be relied upon to tell the truth, a feeling that something is being covered up, even if we don't know exactly what. Let's step back from the specific controversies and ask a simpler question: why? If the Third Secret is just a vision of a pope being shot, why keep it secret for 40 years? Why couldn't it have been published in 1960 as Sister Lucia requested? The official explanations have varied. To avoid sensationalism, to avoid apocalyptic speculation, to respect the prophetic nature of the vision and not reduce it to a prediction about specific events. But these explanations don't quite hold water. The first two secrets were published in the 1940s, and they didn't cause mass panic. They contained a vision of hell and prophecies about war and Russia. Surely those are sensational and apocalyptic, if anything is, yet publishing them was considered appropriate. What was different about the third part? What made it require decades of secrecy? Some possibilities. First, maybe it really did predict the assassination attempt on John Paul II, and publishing it beforehand would have made it a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone knew a pope would be shot, security would be impossible. The prophecy itself would create the conditions for its fulfillment. But this doesn't explain why it couldn't be published after 1981, once the event had occurred. If the secret was fulfilled, if its purpose was accomplished, why keep it hidden for another 19 years? Second, maybe it contained information about church leadership that was embarrassing or damaging. Maybe it named specific people, or described specific failings, or predicted specific crises that the Vatican didn't want to acknowledge publicly. This would explain the secrecy. Institutions don't like airing their dirty laundry. The Church especially, which claims divine guidance, would be reluctant to publish a prophecy that suggested its leaders were failing or would fail. Third, maybe the content was genuinely too disturbing for general publication. Maybe it described catastrophes so terrible that releasing it would cause panic, despair, loss of faith. Maybe the Vatican made a prudential judgment that people weren't ready, that it would do more harm than good. But if so, what changed in 2000? Why were people suddenly ready then when they weren't ready before? Fourth, and perhaps most simply, maybe successive popes just didn't want to deal with it. It was controversial. It was complicated. It raised more questions than it answered. Easier to just keep it locked away. Let sleeping dogs lie. Avoid the whole mess. This is perhaps the most human explanation. Not a grand conspiracy, but simple bureaucratic inertia combined with risk aversion. Why create a problem when you don't have to? But it's unsatisfying, because Sister Lucia said the Blessed Virgin wanted it published in 1960. If heaven makes a request, shouldn't the Church honor it? What does it say about the Church's relationship with heaven if it just ignores prophetic directions when they're inconvenient? Let's trace the timeline of who knew what when. 1944, Sister Lucia writes the secret. Bishop de Silva receives it sealed, doesn't read it. 1957, the envelope is transferred to Rome. Pope Pius XII presumably reads it. He dies in 1958 without publishing it. 1959, Pope John XXIII reads it. He decides not to publish. This does not concern my pontificate. 1963, Pope Paul VI reads it. He also decides not to publish. He dies in 1978 without publishing it. 1978, Pope John Paul V reads it, presumably. He dies after only 33 days, without publishing it. 1978, Pope John Paul II becomes Pope. He presumably reads it before his 1981 shooting. He doesn't publish it until 2000, 22 years after becoming Pope, 19 years after the assassination attempt. So we have 5 popes who read the secret and kept it secret. 5 different men with different personalities, different priorities, different pastoral approaches. Yet all 5 made the same decision. Don't publish. What did they read that made them all reach the same conclusion? What was so consistent in the text that it overrode Sister Lucia's clear indication that Nesti was the right time? The only common thread, it concerned the Church. Cardinal Ottaviani said it involved things that will happen to the Church. If it was about external threats, war, persecution, catastrophe, you'd think at least one of these 5 popes would have published it as a warning. But they all kept silent. This suggests the content was internal, about the Church itself, about failings, crises, problems that the hierarchy didn't want to advertise. Not because they were trying to deceive the faithful, necessarily, but because they genuinely believed it would do more harm than good. But then why publish in 2000? What changed? Perhaps John Paul II felt enough time had passed. Perhaps the crisis, whether it was Vatican II's aftermath, or the secularization of the West, or whatever, had already manifested, so publishing wouldn't reveal anything that wasn't already obvious. Perhaps he wanted to beatify Francisco and Jacinta and felt he couldn't do so while still keeping their central experience secret. Or perhaps he was simply old, aware his death was approaching, and wanted to resolve the matter before passing the burden to his successor. Whatever his reasons, he published, or at least he published something, whether it's everything, whether it's the complete secret, whether there are still documents in the archives we haven't seen, that remains the question. Let's bring this back to the present, to our time, to the world we live in now. The Blessed Virgin appeared in 1917. She warned of wars, of persecutions, of loss of faith. She gave prophecies that were conditional. If people prayed and converted, calamity could be averted. If not, terrible things would happen. Yes. So what happened? Did we pray enough? Did we convert? Did we avert the worst? In some ways, yes, we're still here. The world didn't end. Nuclear war never happened, despite coming frighteningly close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Communism collapsed. Russia opened up. Churches reopened. The Cold War ended without the apocalyptic confrontation many feared. These are not small things. These represent prayers answered, grace flowing, heaven intervening in human affairs. But in other ways, the warnings seem to have come true. The lady warned about a loss of faith. Look at Europe today, once the heartland of Christianity, now largely secular. Churches are empty, crosses are removed from public spaces, Christian moral teaching is dismissed as outdated. Entire generations have grown up without any religious formation whatsoever. She warned about the church facing crisis. Look at the scandals of recent decades. Clergy abuse on a massive scale, covered up by bishops, trust shattered, faith damaged perhaps beyond repair for many, theological confusion, liturgical debates, division between traditional and progressive Catholics so deep it sometimes feels like two different religions. She warned about martyrdom. Look at the Middle East, at Africa, at parts of Asia, Christians murdered for their faith, churches burned, entire communities driven from lands they've inhabited for 2,000 years, modern martyrs whose names we barely know, whose suffering is barely reported. The 100-Year Warning, from 1917 to 2017. What happened in those 100 years? 2 world wars, the Holocaust, communism's death toll of 100 million, nuclear weapons, the sexual revolution, the breakdown of the family, the rise of secularism and materialism, the Church's credibility crisis. On the other hand, unprecedented prosperity for billions, disease eradicated, life expectancy doubled, literacy universal, technology that would seem like magic to our ancestors, information and communication on a scale never before possible, a more interconnected, interdependent world. So which is it? Are we living through the catastrophe the lady warned about? Or did her warnings and the prayers they inspired save us from something worse? Perhaps both. Perhaps the warnings were about possibilities, not certainties. Perhaps we're living in a timeline that could have been much darker, would have been much darker, if not for Fatima, if not for the millions who heeded the call to pray and convert. We'll never know what didn't happen. We'll never see the alternative timeline where nobody prayed, where the message was ignored, where grace didn't flow. We can only see what is. And what is remains complicated, a world of light and shadow, of hope and despair, of faith struggling against doubt, of good fighting against evil, with the outcome still uncertain. Fatima was not the only place where Mary appeared in the 20th century. Throughout the century, there were numerous reported apparitions, some approved by the Church, others not. One stands out as particularly relevant to our discussion: Akita, Japan, in 1973. Sister Agnes Sasagawa, a Japanese nun, reported apparitions of the Blessed Virgin accompanied by miraculous phenomena, a wooden statue that wept tears and blood, stigmata appearing on Sister Agnes's hands, a mysterious voice speaking messages. The messages from Akita echoed Fatima. Pray the rosary, make sacrifices, devotion to the Immaculate Heart, but they also expanded on the warnings. If men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the deluge, such as one will never have seen before. Fire will fall from the sky and will wipe out a great part of humanity. The good as well as the bad will perish, sparing neither priests nor faithful. The survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. This sounds remarkably similar to the leaked Noah's Europa text. Fire from the sky, massive casualties, unprecedented catastrophes, the language of apocalypse. But then, like Fatima, comes the hope. The only arms which will remain for you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. Each day recite the prayers of the rosary. With the rosary, pray for the Pope, the bishops and priests. And most significantly, the work of the devil will infiltrate even into the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops. The priests who venerate me will be scorned and opposed by their confreres. Churches and altars sacked, the church will be full of those who accept compromises. Cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops, the church full of compromise. This is exactly what many believe the Third Secret of Fatima warns about it. The Akita apparitions were thoroughly investigated and approved by the local bishop in 1984. The phenomena were deemed supernatural, the messages consistent with Catholic faith. Sister Agnes was judged credible. Cardinal Ratzinger, as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, reportedly said that the messages of Akita and Fatima are essentially the same. If that's true, if Akita is essentially revealing what Fatima kept hidden, then it suggests the third secret really is about crisis within the church, internal division, compromise with the world, faith weakening from within rather than being destroyed from without. And if that's true, then we're living through it right now. The prophecy isn't about the past or the distant future. It's about the present, about the church we have today, with all its struggles and divisions and crises of faith. Let's be honest about where the church stands today, in 2020. The institution that claims to be the body of Christ, guided by the Holy Spirit, guaranteed by Jesus' promise that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, this institution is struggling, says. Church attendance in the West continues to decline. Vocations remain low. Seminaries close. Parishes merge. Schools shut down, says. The infrastructure built up over centuries is contracting, said. The clergy abuse crisis has devastated trust. Billions paid in settlements. Thousands of victims. Cover-ups at the highest levels. The moral authority of bishops questioned. Some dioceses bankrupted, the faithful wondering if they can believe anything church leaders tell them. Theological division runs deep. Progressive Catholics and traditional Catholics seem to inhabit different realities. They read the same scripture, pray to the same God, claim the same faith, but interpret it so differently they can barely talk to each other. Debates about liturgy, about sexual morality, about women's roles, about papal authority, about dialogue with other religions, these aren't just differences of opinion. They're fundamentally different visions of what the church should be. Recent popes have been polarizing figures in ways few popes have been. To their supporters, their prophetic voices calling the church back to the gospel, to simplicity, to care for the poor, to mercy over judgment. To their critics, they're dangerously ambiguous, undermining doctrine, sowing confusion, weakening the faith. And beyond these internal divisions, there's the external pressure. Secularism growing stronger, Christianity becoming culturally marginalized, young people leaving in droves, finding meaning in other places, other philosophies, other spiritual paths, or in no spiritual path at all. Is this what the third secret warned about? Is this the crisis of faith, the loss of dogma, the infiltration of error that Mary foresaw? Or is this simply the normal ebb and flow of church history? There have been crises before. The Protestant Reformation, the Arian controversy, the Western Schism, The Church has survived them all. Perhaps this too shall pass. But it doesn't feel like it's passing. It feels like it's intensifying, like the divisions are deepening, like the losses are accelerating. And if the Third Secret really was about this, if it warned that the Church would face an internal crisis of faith in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, then keeping it secret makes a certain horrible sense. What bishop would want to announce that the Church itself was going to face collapse from within? What pope would want to fuel that crisis by acknowledging it prophetically? Better to keep silent. Better to hope it wouldn't be as bad as feared. Better to work quietly to address the problems without advertising them to the world. Except silence has its own costs. When the crisis came anyway, as it did, the silence looked like cover-up. The refusal to publish looked like denial. The secrecy undermined trust even further. Maybe publishing the secret wouldn't have prevented the crisis, but maybe it would have prepared people. Maybe it would have mobilized prayer and action sooner. Maybe it would have made clear that heaven saw this coming, warned about it, offered remedies. We'll never know. The decision was made to stay silent, and we live with the consequences of that decision. Perhaps we've been thinking about this wrong. Perhaps we've been approaching the Third Secret as if it's a prediction, a forecast, a piece of information about future events. But what if that's not what it is at all? Cardinal Ratzinger, in his commentary, emphasized this point. Prophecy in the biblical sense is not fortune-telling. It's not a detailed roadmap of the future. It's something different. Prophecy is a call, a warning, an invitation to change. It shows what will happen if people continue on their current path. But it also implies that the path can be changed, that choices matter, that prayer makes a difference, that the future is not fixed. When Jonah prophesied that Nineveh would be destroyed in 40 days, he was giving a true prophecy. But Nineveh repented, and God spared it. Was Jonah's prophecy false? No, it was conditional. If you don't repent, this will happen. They repented, so it didn't happen. Maybe the Third Secret should be understood the same way. Not, this will happen, but this will happen if you don't pray, if you don't convert, if you don't change. And maybe, just maybe, enough people did pray, did convert, did change. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. Enough to tip the balance, enough to release grace into the world, enough to avert the worst outcomes. The catastrophe might have been much worse, the wars more destructive, the loss of faith more complete, the Church's crisis more devastating, but prayer pushed back the darkness. Sacrifice opened channels for grace. Devotion to Mary's Immaculate Heart released protection. We can't see the alternative. We can't measure what didn't happen. But perhaps the greatest miracles are the catastrophes that never occurred because someone prayed. This understanding makes the Third Secret less about information and more about invitation. The content matters less than the response it evokes. Whether we know every word or not, we know what we're called to do: pray, convert, devote ourselves to God, trust in Mary's intercession, live the faith authentically. If the secret mobilizes those responses, it has fulfilled its purpose, whether fully revealed or not. In her last years, Sister Lucia was increasingly isolated. She rarely gave interviews. She didn't write more memoirs. She focused on prayer. Those who did meet her described a woman of deep peace, not troubled by the controversies swirling around her, not anxious about whether people believed her or doubted her, simply faithful, simply present to God. She had seen the Blessed Virgin Mary. That experience shaped her entire life. Everything else flowed from that. The controversies, the questions, the theories, they seemed small to her compared to the reality of that encounter. She prayed for the conversion of sinners, as she had promised all those years ago when she was just a child. She prayed for the Holy Father. She prayed for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. She prayed her rosary daily. the prayers falling from her lips as naturally as breathing. And on February 13, 2005, her breathing stopped. Her heart, which had beaten for 97 years, was still. The last living witness to Fatima was gone. But before she died, she left one more message. In her final interviews, she was asked what people should focus on, what mattered most, what they should do in response to Fatima. Her answer was simple. Pray. Pray the rosary every day. Make sacrifices for sinners. Devote yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and trust that in the end, her heart will triumph. Not worry about the secret, not demand answers from the Vatican, not figure out all the prophecies. Just pray, trust, love, devote yourself to God. Maybe that's the real secret. Maybe everything else is distraction. Maybe the details of what the Virgin said are less important than whether we do what she asked. Pray the rosary. Make sacrifices. Convert your life. Devote yourself to Mary's Immaculate Heart. Work for peace to save souls through prayer and example. If we do these things, perhaps it doesn't matter whether we know every word of the Third Secret. Perhaps we're living its truth by living the life it calls us to. And if we don't do these things, then knowing every word won't help us anyway. Amid all the controversy, all the confusion, all the questions and doubts and theories, one thing remains crystal clear: the promise. In the end, said my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Not might triumph, not could triumph if things go well. Will triumph, certainty, promise, a guarantee. No matter how dark things get, no matter how much the Church struggles or the world suffers or faith seems to fade, in the end, Mary's heart will triumph. What does that mean practically? We don't fully know. Perhaps it means Russia's conversion, which many believe has begun but isn't complete. Perhaps it means a renewal of faith in the West. Perhaps it means the Church emerging from its current crisis purified and strengthened. Perhaps it means the second coming of Christ. Perhaps it means something we can't even imagine yet. But the promise stands. It was given by heaven, and heaven doesn't lie. This is what sustained Sister Lucia through 97 years. This is what sustained Francisco and Jacinta through their suffering and early deaths. This is what has sustained millions of Fatima devotees through wars and persecutions and crises and doubts. In the end, good wins. Love wins. God wins. Mary's heart, which means the love, the compassion, the maternal care of the Mother of God, that heart will triumph over all opposition, all evil, all darkness. When? We don't know. Soon? Eventually? On God's timeline, which is not our timeline. All of the above? But the when matters less than the certainty. It will happen. Count on it. Hope in it. Live as if it's true, because it is true. The third secret. Whatever it contains, whatever it warns about, whatever crises it foresees, all of it leads to this ultimate truth, triumph, victory, the happy ending that Christians have always believed in, now promised specifically by Mary at Fatima. And perhaps that's why the secret could be kept hidden for so long, because the most important part was never secret at all. It was proclaimed publicly in 1917. It was written down and published decades ago. It's available for anyone to read. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph on it. Everything else is footnotes. And so, our story comes to its close, or perhaps not its close, but its resting place. Because this story isn't really finished. It continues even now, in the lives of believers, in the prayers said daily around the world, in the quiet working of grace in human hearts. We've traveled far together, you and I, back to 1917 to 3 children in a Portuguese field, through wars and apparitions, secrets written and secrets kept, prophecies fulfilled and mysteries remaining, through controversy and faith, doubt and devotion, questions that have answers and questions that remain open. What did we learn? Perhaps nothing definitive. Perhaps everything important. We learned that 3 children saw something real, something that changed them, changed the world, changed the course of history in ways both visible and invisible. We learned that they were given messages, warnings about war, about Russia, about loss of faith, calls to prayer, to penance, to devotion to Mary's Immaculate Heart. We learned that some of those messages have been fulfilled. World War II happened as predicted. Russia spread its errors as warned. The Church has faced crises of faith as suggested. The prophecies proved true. We learned that there was a third part to the message, kept secret for decades. Whether it's been fully revealed or not remains debated. Whether it's about past events or future ones, about external threats or internal church crises, about specific predictions or general warnings. On these questions, people of good faith disagree. But we also learned the most important thing, the promise. In the end, Mary's heart will triumph. Light will overcome darkness. Good will defeat evil. God's purposes will prevail. And we learned what we're called to do in the meantime. Pray, especially the Rosary. Make sacrifices, devote ourselves to the Immaculate Heart. Live our faith authentically. Trust in God's providence. Work for peace and the conversion of souls. These things we can do. Whether we know every detail of every secret or not, these things matter, whether the prophecies are fully fulfilled or still unfolding. The Secrets of Fatima, published and unpublished, revealed and hidden, they're not meant to make us anxious. They're not meant to fuel conspiracy theories or obsessive speculation. They're meant to mobilize prayer, to encourage conversion, to give hope. Because heaven sees what's coming. Heaven knows the dangers and the opportunities. Heaven warns when warnings are needed and promises when promises are needed. And heaven invites us to cooperate through our freedom, through our prayers, through our choices in the unfolding of God's plan for humanity. So rest now. Let these thoughts settle. Let the questions remain questions if they must. Let the mysteries remain mysterious. Some things we're meant to know, other things we're meant to trust. Take a deep breath and let it out slowly. The children of Fatima did what they were asked to do. They saw, they heard, they remembered, they suffered, they prayed, and they trusted. We can do the same. Not as visionaries. Most of us won't see the Blessed Virgin with our physical eyes. But as believers, as prayers, as people who choose faith over doubt, hope over despair, love over fear. The message of Fatima, in its essence, is simple. God loves you. Mary cares for you. Heaven is real. Hell is real. Your choices matter. Your prayers matter. The future is not fixed. A grace is available. Conversion is possible. And in the end, love wins. Rest in that truth. Let it settle over you like a warm blanket on a cold night. Let it ease the tensions of the day, the worries of tomorrow, the questions that have no immediate answers. The secrets, published or unpublished, understood or mysterious, they're not the point. They never were. They're signposts, pointing to something greater. They're invitations to relationship with God, with Mary, with the whole communion of saints in heaven who pray for us and with us. Lucia lived 97 years carrying those secrets with 97 years of prayer and faithfulness. She saw wars and peace, crises and renewals and doubt and faith. She carried burdens most of us can't imagine, and yet, by all accounts, she died peacefully, content, having done what she was asked to do. Francisco and Jacinta, those 2 small children, lived such short lives, 10 years, 9 years, brief moments in the span of human history, but in those brief moments, they touched eternity. They saw heaven's messenger. They received heaven's warnings. They offered their sufferings for souls they would never meet. for people not yet born, for a future they would never see. And their example lives on. Their prayers live on. The grace released through their sacrifices lives on, rippling outward through time, touching lives in ways we cannot see or measure. This is the mystery at the heart of Fatima. Not what exact words were said or which prophecies refer to what events, but the mystery of how heaven and earth touch, how the infinite breaks into the finite, how 3 poor children become instruments of grace for millions. How your prayers, yes, yours it whispered in the darkness, are offered with doubt or with confidence, small or great, how your prayers matter, how they're woven into God's providence, how they release grace, how they change things. Not because you're special, not because you've had visions or know secrets, but because you're human, and humanity is the bridge between heaven and earth, because you have freedom, and God respects that freedom so much that He waits for your yes before acting, because love works through consent, through cooperation, through willing participation. The lady came to children because children understand this instinctively. They know how to receive, how to trust, how to say yes without needing to understand everything first. Can we recover that childlike trust? Can we pray even when we don't understand? Can we believe even when we have questions? Can we hope even when circumstances look dark? This is what Fatima asks of us. Not intellectual mastery of every detail, not certainty about every controversy, but trust, simple, childlike trust that heaven knows what it's doing, that the story is still being written, that the ending has been promised and will be delivered. I said. Let yourself relax now, your shoulders, your jaw, the places where you hold tension without even realizing it. Breathe deeply. Once, twice, 3 times, the breath of life that God breathed into Adam, that sustains you every moment, that will carry you gently into sleep. The night is deep now. The questions can wait until morning. The mysteries can remain mysteries for one more night. You've heard the story, you've traveled the journey, you've considered the possibilities. Now it's time to simply be, to rest in the darkness, to trust that you are held, that you are loved, that you are known. The Blessed Virgin, who appeared to those children so long ago, who promised triumph in the end, she watches over you too. She prays for you. She desires your good, your peace, your salvation, with a mother's heart that never tires, never gives up, never stops loving. The secrets she entrusted to the children, they were ultimately about love. God's love for humanity, Mary's love for her children, the love that suffers to save, the love that warns to protect, the love that promises to give hope. And you are included in that love, wrapped in it, surrounded by it, whether you fully understand Fatima or not, whether you can answer all the questions or not, whether you feel worthy or not. You are loved, you are held, you are carried through the night. So sleep now. Let your mind stop working. Let your body relax into rest. Let your spirit rest in the hands of God who made you and knows you and cherishes you. The children of Fatima are in heaven now, all 3 of them. Francisco and Jacinta, who died so young. Lucia, who lived so long. They see clearly now what they saw through a glass darkly then. They understand now what was mysterious before, and they pray for us still, for all of us who struggle and question and hope. The secret they carried, whether fully revealed or partially hidden, it was always meant to bring peace. Not anxiety, hope does not fear, but action, not paralysis, but prayer, not speculation. And so, as you drift toward sleep, let this be your prayer, simple and trusting. Mary, Mother of God, you who appeared at Fatima, watch over me this night. You who warned of dangers, protect me. You who promised triumph, give me hope. You who asked for prayer, receive these quiet thoughts as prayers. You who love with a mother's heart, hold me as I sleep. And to all the questions I cannot answer, to all the mysteries I cannot solve, To all the controversies I cannot resolve, to these, I say, not tonight. Tonight, I simply trust, I rest, I let go. In the end, your immaculate heart will triumph. You have promised, and that promise is enough. The story is told, the night is here. Sleep waits with open arms. And in the morning, there will be new light, new grace, new mercy, new possibilities. But that is for tomorrow. Amen.